All right, the time's come to call this meeting to order. If you would, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, everyone. Good to see some familiar faces in the audience again tonight. We will go ahead and start with public participation. If there's anyone who would like to speak, please come to the microphone and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none, we will proceed with our agenda. The first order of business for the committee tonight is to hear department budget reviews. To start us off, we have the Food Services Department. If I would invite the representative, Tom Tussaud. Oh, Dave Sicky. Sorry. I only met you guys each once last year, so. Okay. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague. I believe this was Dan Coakley.
It was an honor and a privilege to meet with Dave. We met at the Food Services office. The meeting began at 1:00. It lasted about an hour, and he answered every question I asked him, including the ones by email and text after the fact. After I left there, and he'd be right back to me with an answer to whatever question I had for him. For those of you who don't know, food services is actually a very unique department because it's the only one that's self-funding. Excuse me. I got off a red eye this morning, so if I'm slow, just give me a little leeway. If I should fall asleep, nudge me. Okay? A Gestalt view of the Food Services Department. They're the only department that produces revenue. They serve all the schools in the district. They follow the federal nutritional guidelines with 5 components. Although the district does provide free and reduced meals, they are reimbursed by the federal government for those meals. They get commodities from the Department of Defense monthly. They get fruit and vegetables weekly. They're audited yearly. One of the biggest challenges is projecting food costs a year out. They also have hiring issues and keeping staff, as we've seen with everything. When asked if they were serving all eligible students, the answer was yes, and that they have a new homeless liaison who is right on top of any newly eligible students. I asked if they carried negative account balances and how many remained unpaid. The answer was they carry negative balances for meals charged to students' accounts. The charge policy lets them charge a reimbursable meal if the student does not have funds in their account. The current negative balance from the start of school until January 16th is $17,962. The positive balance in student accounts is $82,536. I asked who designed the food menus, and Dave said he himself does, but it's based on very strict federal guidelines that include calories, the amount of salt or sugar, vegetable groups, starchy groups, and the food is checked and served by quantities. I noticed there were language issues, and I asked how many languages do they utilize for the program. The number of languages Dave didn't know, but Spanish, Brazilian, and Portuguese are 3 that came up, and they will get an interpreter for any language that might come up. We asked, are there any issues related to My School Bucks? The answer was, My School Bucks is a great tool for parents to be able to access their students' meal accounts. They're able to make deposits by credit card. The total payment on account from My School Bucks this year from August 28th until January 16th is $450,199.40. Said it's much easier than processing checks from parents and easier than doing cash transactions from students. They still offer all of that, but the majority of deposits are done through My School Bucks. With any online system, there are always a few errors, but he's still very happy with most transactions. I asked if he could walk us through the procurement procedures and any issues related to them. Have there been purchases where price was not the consideration, and can you elaborate? And he said, yes, there are issues when going with the low bidder, because oftentimes the low bidder doesn't give you the best service. And in follow-up, he used relationships along with fair price to get the better service, and he thinks that works extremely well for him. I asked to explain what self-funded means. Food service provides the revenues to meet our needs. There was a line item with an expenditure of $87,3781. Why are we proposing $15,000? It's level funded from last year, and it allows for catastrophic expenditures. There's another line item with an expenditure of $52,934. We're proposing $65,000. It was budgeted at $75,000. And this is to pay for paperware, soaps, and cleaning supply, to pay for the office supplies for the food service office, to pay for replacement of small kitchenwares in all 6 schools, to offset increased pricing and to lock in pricing. And with inflation the way it was, they felt he had to go that way. There was a line in food service, food and milk with an expenditure of $607,419. Why are we proposing $700,000? To pay for the purchase of milk and juices for recess and lunch, as well as assorted meats, breads, rolls, fruit, and vegetables for Class A and a la carte lunches. The Merrimack School District continues to participate with the Buying Collaborative to receive better bid pricing on food items purchased. This will help keep costs of general food items stable. Due to supply chain issues and labor shortages, costs still remain unstable. The vendor's good with some prices locked in for the next year. The technology, this increase seemed extensive based on 8334 and it's 9500. This is to pay for annual costs associated with the service contract for computerized point-of-sales terminals in all 6 schools and the food service office. This amount provides coverage for all parts, labor, travel, phone support, and loaners. Start to year-end costs have risen. Yearly fee, the anticipated costs are expected to continue to rise. I asked him to explain the expenditure of $7,753 with the request of $7,000. Where does this money come from? Where did it go in years? It's reimbursement from the federal government, cash from paying students. Food service can hold a surplus, but it can only be used for food service items. There was an item on food service improvement development. There was no expenditure last year. This was for travel. And what I said to Dave was, where the hell could you go with that amount? And he let me know that he's actually on a national board and they pay for his travel. So the school district is not paying for Dave to travel anywhere. And I'd suggest that maybe they should. Later, as I got off a plane this morning, I sent him a note and said, what do we do with leftover food? You know? We try very hard not to have any leftovers. At the elementary levels, they get student counts for meals before they ship them from the production kitchens. At the bigger schools, they're able to cook as lunch goes on to replenish the serving lines. If they can utilize any foods which may be left over, they do it the very next day. They're not able to reuse any food items which were left on the service line, so they try to put out only what they need for the last lunch. I asked them what effect, if any, did the default budget have on you and your staff? The answer was none. I asked the question I always ask is, what question did you expect us to ask that we did not ask? And the answer surprised me. He thought I was going to ask him about the van and replacing the van. Now, the van has issues. Keep in mind, this is the only van they have, and it's what they use to transport the food between all the schools. And they're self-funded. So they have enough money in there, they could buy the van they want. But apparently, when they went before the board, the van became an issue, and he thought I was going to ask about that. I didn't. I thought that was well planned out and well done. As I got off a plane this morning, I saw something on federal budget cuts on loans and grants, and it panicked me. And I again sent David a message, and he got right back to me. And I wanted to know, does that affect our food services program? Can you imagine if they cut all of the reimbursements? It'd be a disaster. And I got back what I thought. He said, not that I know of, but I'll keep you informed. I got to tell you, it's a well-run program. And I'd like to invite this committee to rise and recognize this man for over 30 years of heading up this. And there shouldn't be any questions. But if there are, I'm sure he'll handle them.
Are there any questions from the committee? Anthony?
Thank you. So one question, and sir, this might be a Matt question. We get those sometimes.
Yeah.
So just quick question, and it is about food service. Don't worry. So there's a thing that I noticed in there, several line items that amount to about $95,000 that are called lunch support salaries. And I just happened to notice that those lunch support salaries are billed against the 100 account, which is the general fund, which is taxpayer funded, and not the food service account. And, just honest question, is it practicable or reasonable? It sounds like those people are kind of like acting in service of lunch. And is it possible to have those salaries funded from the surplus generated by revenues rather than having those salaries be taxpayer funded?
You familiar with those, Dave?
No.
I didn't think so. That's why I'm here.
50,000.
That's right. I snuck up behind you. No, I think what you're talking about when you look in the general fund, Fund 100, these are the lunch monitors, right? That we pay for. They're there to make sure the kids behave, and they're there to help with, especially the little kids, help them get through the line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not there to actively serve the food or act in the participation of its preparation. So that's why it's a general fund expense as opposed to a food service expense.
Mm-hmm. And if I could ask the question just slightly differently, like if I go to a restaurant, for example, the person at the front who brings me to the table doesn't help prepare the food, but they still get paid by, the establishment. So I'm not saying it's been wrong all these years necessarily, but I am kind of asking, like, does it make sense? Is there a case there to potentially take that cost, which is for the administration of a lunch, and possibly have that paid for out of the food revenue surplus?
One could think of it, but it's been that way here in another district for at least 30, 40 years. So I see no reason to change it at this point in time, because they don't really report to Dave. They report to the building principal and whoever the teacher is on duty. So it's a whole different section. If you want, you can make a case for anything.
Sure.
I'm-
Yeah, it's just a matter
respectfully,
of-
I'm saying, but
Yep,
we've
I
always
understand.
done
Always
it
done
that
it
way, which
that
kind of
way.
sounds stupid to say, but I really think it's better off being separated as far as the normal operation of the school goes, as opposed to paid for by the lunch program. My opinion.
Okay.
Okay. Marie, you have a question?
Yeah, just this discussion has generated a thought in my mind as a former teacher. Is this replacing teachers doing lunch duty? I mean, do teachers still do lunch duty?
Don't teachers still do lunch duty?
I mean,
No,
what
no.
you're describing
Yeah,
with
they're
these-
lunch monitors, so they're in the cafeteria.
That sounds like what I used to do when I did lunch duty at the high school.
Well, I think that has now been
We don't
passed
have
down
monitors
to
at the high schools. I think
Yeah.
it's Mace. It's
Oh, you
elementary
don't?
level.
elementary
Okay.
level,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
And it's basically to help the kids find their seats, and
got it. So
Yeah.
they still probably have lunch duty at the high school.
they do.
Teachers, yes. At the high school, right.
Okay, got it, thanks.
And the middle school, and I think the upper level has
Thanks.
monitors.
So just, I'm confused. For clarification, do we not have teachers doing lunch duty now across all schools, or is it just at the high school that they don't?
I think it's the elementary level that have the monitors up through upper elementary, and then middle school and high school have faculty.
Okay, so the monitors are the support staff?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, they're not in the support staff agreement, so they're not affiliated. They're not part of MESA, the support staff, but they are support staff as far as we're concerned.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other committee questions? All right. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and I appreciate that very much.
All right. Next, I will invite my colleague Lee French to share the report from Technology and Learning Services. Get on your mic and say it.
Yeah, okay. I would like to make a motion. I move that presentations and PowerPoints by committee members must be included in the predetermined and equally distributed agenda. The presentation content should be provided in full 2 days prior to the meeting, made clear it's your own thoughts when presented in public, and limited to 3 to 5 minutes. So I just want to make that motion. Sorry if I talked into this instead.
There's a motion on the table. Seconded.
So the reason I made the motion is because the past 2 meetings we have had a couple PowerPoints that have been put up that have been I brought to my attention as asked if I was responsible for them, if everybody knew about them, and I just wanted to make sure that if anybody was having any sort of PowerPoint or presentation that isn't on the agenda, that we have that information ahead of time, so that if we need to process the information, we have the ability to do that before we're kind of sprung on with that. And also with the reason to the 3 to 5 minutes, it's just if we're going to have presentations that aren't planned for, then that's going to be if everybody wanted to do a 5-minute presentation, that'd be an hour and a half. So that was the reason for the time restraint. But I want people to be able to speak their opinions and thoughts. I just want it to be clear that it's theirs and not coming from the entire committee, and that we are making that information shared equally between everybody ahead of time, so that if we need to process or give any sort of feedback or thoughts about it, we are able to do that.
Any other discussion? Shannon?
Just from the other side of it, when I write things down, I love having a PowerPoint, because it allows me to put my thoughts down, and then it's easy for people to see it as my thoughts are coming out, and they can see it rather than having to write everything down like Dan right now. I'm writing down all of his notes. It's helpful to have it on the board so that I can look at it while they're talking, but listen, because then I can see it and listen at the same time.
I think
that's just my thought.
I was going to say, I like the think PowerPoint and seeing it visually is a great idea. I'm just saying so that we can see it ahead of time. So when we get our agendas and it says like our minutes and everything, if we're having any sort of presentation, if we can have it ahead of time so that we can see it and be able to process it and not try to like on the fly speak to it.
I saw Naomi, and then I'll take Anthony.
One point in the motion that I agree with is I want people to be aware that when you have a PowerPoint up on the screen here and folks are watching it at home, oftentimes Merrimack TV will flash to whatever is up on the screen and they'll hear the voices talking behind it. And if it's not clearly labeled that it's a personal opinion of a committee member, the public doesn't necessarily know that. And if we have logos on it, or if we don't, even if there's nothing on it, they don't necessarily know that that's the opinion of the committee member presenting it. They could take that to be an official position of the school district. They could take that to be an official position of the budget committee on items that the budget committee has not yet voted on. So I think it's really important that we're clear, because like I said, it's just there on the TV screen and they're hearing voices over it. They don't, if they like tune in the middle, they don't realize that it's a personal presentation from a committee member.
Anthony?
Right. Three things. One, would that include the presentations that we get, like this one? Should we be able to review that material 2 days in advance, or the presentations that the administration has given? Because I've never had the opportunity to review any of that in advance. It's always live at the meeting. Second, anything that is presented here does get included in the minutes and becomes public document. So in fact, all of that becomes government documents and is from this committee, but understand the logo thing. But third, and most importantly, previously, I know Rachel had asked about a spreadsheet that I had shown and asked me to share that, and I did, and then I was immediately sort of gently reprimanded for possibly having discussion outside of the context of the meeting by sharing perspective or opinions. So, which is true? Are we allowed to share perspective and opinions with each other outside of the public eye, or are we supposed to do it in the public eye?
So my motion was specific in that it is presentations and PowerPoints by committee members. So that would be what we would have. And when you said that it is a reflection of the committee when it's put in the minutes, that would mean that the spreadsheet that you had would be like a reflection of what all of our thoughts were when you put that up there. And I don't think that's what we're trying to say. I think that was what I was trying to make as a distinction, because people saw that it had the Merrimack School District logo on it and asked if that was a documentation that they could see and if it was something that we had created. And I was questioned about it, and it didn't feel comfortable because it's not my PowerPoint. So I wanted to make sure that that was clear.
Just to be clear, though, that is those are government documents. They are accessible through Right to Know. If anybody asks
Your
Pat,
PowerPoint?
yes, every
Yes, it's the
slide
Right to Know,
that
but
I've
that's
shown.
not what we're discussing with this motion.
Dan?
Just to be clear, every presentation that I did, I copied to every one of the committee members who were on the committee. That included Anthony, Chuck, Lee, Shannon, and I also copied them to Patricia and to Jen. So they were there. I could easily do those to all of the members if need be, but I made sure everybody on the committee would get those notes.
Gina?
And correct me if I'm wrong, Caitlin, I think what you're talking about are presentations and subject matter that are not on the agenda. So for example, Dan, you did the right thing. So, you had copied everyone that was on the liaison team on the budget committee along with Jen and Pat. If Shannon, I see your point as you're trying to write down everything that Dan was saying, for example, for food services, would it be helpful if you saw that in advance? And I can we can certainly do that. But Caitlin, from what I understand, you're speaking specifically about presentations that are not part of the agenda versus just any sort of, if you have a presentation like I have for student services that I'm going to be sharing. It's not even a presentation, it's just my summary. But you're talking specifically about those type of PowerPoints that are not reflective of what we are here to do as the budget committee, which is follow the agenda for each.
Yes, correct.
Naomi?
I'm glad you brought up that point, Gina, because I think that is what I'm taking to be the spirit of the motion is we want advance warning of what we're going to be talking about. And that's different from having a conversation outside of a meeting, right? The way the school board does it is the chair will, if you have something that you want to talk about, if you have a presentation you want to do, you get in touch with the chair about a week before the meeting. You provide any supporting documents to the chair, and then the chair and the secretaries work together and they put together a packet, and the packet goes out to all members before the meeting. So the public is notified because it's on the agenda. So if it's something they want to speak to, they also have the opportunity. It's not sprung on them. The committee knows what's coming so that if there's any independent research they want to do, they can go do that before the discussion. Sometimes if there's not like time for that in the comments part at the end of the meeting, Lori Rothhaus calls it the blinker before the turn, right? If there's something we think we're going to want to bring up at another meeting, we'll say, just by the way, this is something I've been thinking about. I'm going to probably bring it up at a future meeting for committee consideration. And that way, it's out there, it's in front of the public, and everybody knows what to expect.
Brian?
I mean, there's no doubt we're talking about Anthony's PowerPoints, but I believe there was an issue at first when he showed his first one that everybody didn't have them, and I think he did send everything that he had to everyone on the committee. You did send it out to everyone, because I think that was the problem at
Yes,
first.
I got asked to share the spreadsheet. I did, and then I got reprimanded for sharing opinion with the committee. Like the emails are on the server, like you can look at them.
And it is all public information that's being used for the spreadsheets, so it's already been out there. I don't know. If it's a matter of all we got to do is add to the agenda that we're going to be looking at spreadsheets, then there shouldn't be a problem with that, but
Well, I mean, I'll weigh in for just a moment. At each of our meetings thus far, we have had presentations or from the department heads, and then I attempted for us to have a little bit of a mini work session on each department while the information was still fresh. During that work session, that is an opportunity for anybody to ask any question that is important to you to know about that presentation or a prior presentation if we've already addressed it at another meeting. So I think that anytime somebody from the committee is bringing forth their questions, that's valuable. And I would not want to shut down any committee member from bringing forth whatever they want to know about the budget, because our goal here is to make sure that we're making the most, that we're putting forth that bottom line number that is prudent based on our analysis of the budget. And so if folks are doing analysis that is their own work product and they're willing to share it with the rest of the committee, I think there's value in that. And I would hate to shut that down. Rachel?
Thanks, John. I agree with the sentiment of everybody here is here for a reason, and it's to, gather information and get to understand the process and know. I think from a procedural standpoint, and Anthony, you sent me an email earlier, and this was something I responded back. My response back to you was, again, a procedural thing. So I think that any kind of questions that you have that you want to put into a presentation format, whether it's PowerPoint, Excel, Word, PDF, any type of, something where you are trying to display your laptop. I just think that is, what presentations are coming up, from just our, overall schedule. That's something that, and Naomi brought it up, you work with the chair to say, I would like to be able to present these things. It gets put on the agenda so everybody at that point knows. It's not restricting you from information, but it's just not having it be so ad hoc and deterring from official business of what's already on the agenda.
Marie?
I'm a little bit confused because I think the wording of the motion was presentations or PowerPoints. And as we're heading into some work sessions in the next couple of meetings, it seems like we each are doing our own analysis of numbers and looking for any efficiencies we might find, which would necessitate during a work session that you present what you found. Whether that's, I have a set of notes here and I'm speaking from my notes, or whether someone is more comfortable putting up a slide on the screen and working from that. I mean, I was a teacher. I know that that's a comfortable way to present things. I mean, are we curtailing all of that by looking at that motion?
I personally think we are, in a way, curtailing
I do
people
too.
being able to
Can I speak?
present. Let me just finish 1 second. People being able to, present their thoughts and their analysis in whatever way makes sense to them. I would not put together a PowerPoint, but that's not my style. And, I think everybody has their own style for how they present. And so maybe you want to consider amending your motion. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, first, I think that the spreadsheet that you put together, I mean, I'm a paper person, so I'm probably one of the only ones left. I get it, but I'm still here, and I haven't vet. I mean, how we vetted those numbers aside from the basic 6-year one that he gave us. You said you married it with other projections, and I'm not going to go through the whole binder that we already got put together to make sure. We're just trusting that it's right, which I would like to be able to, but I don't want it to say that this comes from the Merrimack School District with the logo on it if it's not coming from the Merrimack School District with the logo on it, because it's not. And I'm not saying that it isn't correct numbers. I'm saying I haven't, because that's not how my brain works. So that's my point with that.
I'm going to take a few more comments, and then let's try to wrap it up. I'm not sure who was first. Okay, I'll take Gina and then Marie.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't think the intent of her motion is to curtail anything. She's saying, yes, I mean, if you would like to do that, that's fine, but just let us view them ahead of time so there's no surprise at the meeting. And just, we want to make sure that, the entire committee is in agreement on this is what we're presenting. Make sure that it's factual, it's based on budgets, it's not about curriculum, it's not about, whether, about a specific program. It's about the budget. So I think she's trying to encourage that, but just, let's get it on the agenda. Let's have it reviewed ahead of time. So, great. If you do that, then I think that's great. But let's just as a committee, so we work as one, have it sent ahead of time to the group so we can review, if we have any questions internally for us. So we're not like, oh, what do you, unified front. So that's my opinion.
Marie?
This came up at my one of my recent liaison meetings, that I had used some figures from that 6-year spend. I am under the impression that that was obtained from the school district office and that it was official school district numbers. And if I take a spreadsheet and I want to look at, say, the food services, and I can just put in that spreadsheet that I want all the things from, what is it, line 40, I think, or 42, I forget which. Then bingo, you've got that column right in front of you. You're looking at just those numbers. It is way easier than this.
But that's not what
And, I mean, are we saying that we can't do that?
It sounds like the spreadsheet and the analysis are not in question. What is
Okay.
what is being proposed is to distribute before
Yes,
a meeting,
but the
right?
the spreadsheet, the 6-year one that we received, you said you married that with something that you.
Yep, there were
that-
two different documents that Jen sent us, and I put the two documents together. So it's Jen's, what was distributed to us as a committee with what
There's-
was distributed to
The
as a
second
committee.
piece was
Okay.
on the workbook that I sent that had the, it was sent before our first, our meeting, November 15th, I think, or 19th, where it
And-
was like year-to-date and then last year's spend.
Mhm. Can I ask a clarifying question? Because, I mean, honestly, and it's okay, it does feel a little bit like a coordinated attack. But during this meeting, from the beginning, with Dan to my left and Gina to my right, I have put together slides with 9 questions, multiple slides, and pictures during the meeting while listening with questions that I would like to ask if the moment comes up. Are those not allowed because I didn't share them before the meeting? They didn't exist before the meeting. And these two sat here and have seen me typing and putting the pictures together. How am I supposed to share that beforehand?
That's what I was saying. It's your personal work product and your own analysis, and we may not all do analysis in the same way, but I don't necessarily think that that needs to be an agenda item. I think if you bring something up and it's shared with the group all together and people have questions or would like to see it after the meeting, absolutely. Rachel requested that that be sent out for review, and Anthony did. So I think we're in the clear on that.
How is putting slides of a PowerPoint with your questions you have and putting it up there as all of our information, that doesn't come from the whole group, right? Your questions that you have are your own. That's what I'm saying. If you're going to put something up there and it's going to be that you're making it clear that it is this needs to be, because I'm getting approached about it being information that we have that is that we're having up there as that there's like $1 million cuts, like it has writing on there, like not just the information that they gave us. The words that you have written up there are not information that the district has provided. They're your own personal opinion on what you think you would like the budget to be cut to. That's your opinion. That's not my opinion. So that's what I'm having a problem with. Things being put there as if they are everybody's opinion if we're saying that we want to cut the budget millions of dollars.
Rachel? Oh, Dan, sorry.
Let her go first. 'Cause I'm going to call the motion.
Thanks, Dan. And I think I've lost my train of thought now. So going back to the presentation with your questions, you can ask the questions. It's more of just not displaying what's on your laptop in the moment and having it, like, I think that's the gist of it. So you can ask your questions, we can discuss and talk through. So I think that's part of it. I did just want to share, so last year, so 2 years ago, I don't think we used anything to display products or files or anything. Last year, I know that there was a lot of work done by the chair and I don't know who within the district, but it was very specific to just ensure that there was one spreadsheet shown by budget line item, and that was for the work sessions. So anything that we wanted to discuss, there was one person in charge of a file that would type in the numbers, plus or minus. We would discuss it. It was a motion, right? But it was a very thought out process, and I think it just flowed better. So if that is something that we want to do, maybe, we just need to think of the right process to do to share information electronically in the moment.
And I do think that we will follow a similar process for the work session, because I do agree that was very valuable for us all to be able to kind of pull together and look at a number together and then have conversations. So we can look forward to doing that. Brian?
Point of order.
Could we just simplify and put
sorry.
Anthony's personal opinion at the top header of the spreadsheet, and that way there would be no question as to whose information it was or where it was coming from? Seems like a simplistic thing to do. I mean, if that's what the big problem is everybody's worried that it's groupthink and everyone's thinking the same way he is, then the rationale would be, this is my personal opinion, which then will be in the minutes, it will be on TV. He can put Anthony's personal opinion at the top of his spreadsheet slide, and then no one will mistake it for everyone's opinion. It will just be his opinion that he's worked really hard and put a lot of his time into doing. So just to kind of shred it up and take it away just doesn't seem fair.
I call the motion.
Okay. So we have a motion by Dan. It was seconded by Rachel, I think. Yep. Would you like to restate the motion for everyone?
Yes. I move that presentations and PowerPoints by committee members must be included in the predetermined and equally distributed agenda. The presentation content should be provided in full 2 days prior to the meeting, made clear it is your own thoughts when presenting in public, and limited to 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed? The motion does not pass. I will make a note that I've observed, this is my first year being chair. I've observed quite a few things in the procedural manner of the way that this committee operates that I think we should discuss at one of our later meetings after we've had an opportunity to get through the business of the committee. And I very much hope that we can consider this and many other things that have come up as opportunities to improve the way that we do our business as a committee and to be more process-oriented. So I'd just like to leave everyone with those thoughts. Please be thinking of that. Okay, on to the business of the Technology and Library Services Liaison Team. I do believe, Lee, you have a summary or a presentation? Or would you like Jason to give it?
Jason, if you want, or would you like me to?
I'm perfectly fine having you do it, Lee. Thank you.
We had a work session, not a formal meeting, as it was not publicized. In that work session, we reviewed the budget for technology and library media services. A few things stand out very clearly in that if you look at our budget request form from his group, you will see that there are all zeros. So he's not really requesting additional funding for his group. In his summary, he is clear to note several things. One of the big ones being that the library and technology moving forward will be separated. And part of that comes from a new law that's being pushed that has been pushed through, where all of the individual buildings have to account for their own periodicals and library-like items, supplies, other instructional media, etc. Another factor you'll see in his budget is that there's an average increase of close to 9% on most of their licensed subscriptions. That's almost a 10% increase across the board in software. And yes, 9%. That's significant, right? And that seems to be the norm as of late with software. It's ever increasingly more expensive to purchase or to provide the service that comes with it. What isn't immediately recognizable is that in his budget last year, he saved almost $130,000 out of his budget. That's money that came back to us, the taxpayers. He and his staff, Amy, did an amazing job of looking and taking a deep dive into the softwares that they use, who's using what, and really kind of dialing back what wasn't needed. So I applaud the work that they did in really diving deep and hard into what that means for them. They're in the second year of a 6-year plan. They were asked to come, when Jason joined the Merrimack District, he was asked to come up with a plan for what this students need and what his particular budget needed. And in that 6-year plan, again, we're in year 2. So I think I'll go back and say again that after just the first year, they were able to cut about over $100,000 worth of stuff in that budget, which is really remarkable in my opinion. I think I'll turn it over now to Jason and let you kind of go through what else we need.
Sure. Thank you, Lee, and pleasure being here. Thank you for having me. This year, back to what Lee was saying, so in this budget cycle, before we gave our budget to the school board, we were really scrutinized what we had, right? Because it's the first year of the recycle plan, of the replacement plan for the computers, and what do we really need, right? So we know that software was high. So we really scrutinized software as much as we could. Even though it kept on raising, there's going back and working with Amy Doyle and other educators and our tech coordinators. What do we have that's not necessarily aligning with the curriculum? What necessarily is really expensive when there's other types of software out there that we can change? So we looked at that and we're starting to make our cuts. Going into that, because every year things are going to change. Every year things are going to go up. So we want to make sure that our numbers are as solid as possible, and that there isn't any waste going on there. I've been in district for about 3 years, so that first initial replacement plan, all the subsequent ones going further, we said at the last school board meeting, when we presented the budget, that we think that our projected 6-year plan, we're going to be able to undercut that going forward. Doesn't mean that the cycle is ever going to end, right? It's technology. It's an ever-occurring cost. But I just want you guys to know that we're looking at those numbers hard and all of those devices and all of the software and everything.
Can I make?
Sure.
That's one point I really want to make. You know, it's stated it's a six-year plan, but that doesn't mean it's going to end and drop off and it's going to be 0 after 6 years, right? It's just we're looking at 6 years. Anything more than like 3, 4, 5, 6 years, especially for technology that changes all the time, you're trying to do the best you can, but it's not an accurate portrayal of what you really think is going to happen because technology changes all the time. So it's stated as just a 6-year review going forward, but it's gonna be a recurring cost every single year, every year.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And a lot of times when we do our cycles, a lot of times the magic number's 4, right? But we looked at that 4-year, right? We looked at that hard and we were like, that number, we can't do that number, right? So we went and we didn't even look at 5. We went right straight to 6.
Straight to 6.
What's the thing that we can do that's still that's fiscally responsible, but also makes it so that we can stay current and that the technology in the classrooms don't fail and everything like that.
Yeah,
And
the
we landed-
the 4-year number that Jason was talking about, that looked like it was too much for the board, the budget committee, the community to swallow.
Mhm.
So that's why we did an elongation of the plan. We chopped it up into 6 years to try and spread it out a little bit. Because, this all started out with ESSER money that we had to build up our network. Because during the COVID period, we automatically had to become 21st century schools with every kid having a laptop and every kid having, a device. And it was kind of a brutal time to put it all together. And Jason has done a tremendous job in kind of the inventorying of everything we have. We have, what did you tell me the other day? 8,000 devices?
So 8,122 devices in district, right?
That's a lot of
That's
gear.
beyond just computers, right? That's projectors and other things, right?
Switches,
Phones and
routers,
everything.
whatever phones, yeah,
But
exactly.
but it's a substantial number, right? And there's always a cost to making sure that those are up to date.
Sorry, Jason.
Oh, you're good. And secure, right? And the other thing that's tough too is companies will end date things, right? So we can't get support anymore for it. We can't get parts, or if we do, it's very hard to get them and whatnot. So so that's why we landed on the 6-year plan. The other thing that that's notable in here is we did go and split out library and tech. So you'll see some lines that look like there's a decrease in there, but that has to do with library. But that's mainly because that was moved out to the building budgets, right? So you'll see in there for like supplies, we moved that out. Obviously periodicals, that's not in technology, that's in library, so that got split out. Books as well, obviously got split out. So those are those main pieces big pieces of the budget. And I'm happy to answer any other questions they may have.
Are there any questions from the committee? Marie?
Yeah, I'm looking at the 865007 line, software and licensing, which you were speaking about. And I'm just a little unclear as to what that covers. Does that cover the software to support curricula and the software to support like the district-wide Power School and all of those things?
So that's a very, very good question, right? Because
Yeah.
there's like a mix of things in there depending on its needs. But say like iReady, for instance, that wouldn't be under here. So the math program itself wouldn't be under here, but we'll have other items. So like some software that might end up being a supplemental piece to that, right? The other thing that's in there is our license renewal for like Microsoft, and that's a big one. That one jumped up huge 1 year because Microsoft said if you want desktop version of Office, you got to get this new tier, and then that just killed us, right? And we were able to get that down a little bit this year, but still, it's a substantial piece, and we're going to try to keep on cutting that the best that we can going forward. There'll be some software in there that is related to curriculum, but isn't part of that core programmatical piece, right? So we have a little bit of everything, and there's still more things that we're finding that we're bringing in under our software belt that some of the schools have. You'll see that maybe we buy for the middle school, but the high school might buy for the same thing, for the same type of software that we have. So it's a really good question. It's hard and easy to answer at the same time.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things that we're trying to clean up and organize
So-
every year that we go forward.
So does that, that kind of gathering in of things, does that account for the fact that the 23-24 expenditure was like 348,000, and our request for next year is 630,000? I know you said there's a 9% increase. But is it also including more things than you used to not have in that line?
For the most part, we've been getting rid of instead of adding to it.
Oh.
Because our goal is to try to streamline that software so that we strategically find software that we can use across multiple buildings, right?
Mhm.
But some things that are good for elementary aren't good for middle and high school, right?
Yeah.
So we'll have a little bit of mix there. But we do have a lot of pieces, but we've all been working very, very hard to say, does this make sense anymore? We have these other pieces of software that can do the same thing. Does that work? How much PD do we need to give the teachers and others to let's go with this route and sunset some of the other software?
Some of the newer ones that you're replacing maybe are more expensive than the ones you're discarding.
Not necessarily.
I'm
no.
just trying
most of the
to
stuff. Yeah, most of the
see
stuff
what
that
that
we're
difference is.
purchasing isn't going to be more money.
Mm.
But a lot of things that you're going to see here from the 23-24 was also a side effect of that capital improvement plan, right? So as we're looking at hardware, we're also looking at software. So we started taking a lot more under our wing on 23-24 school year. So that's why you'll see 348. But then this year, this current fiscal year, we're up at 581. And then next year we're seeing now you're seeing next year with that increase at 630.
Thank you.
Lee?
I wanted to clarify something that Jason said. He said they're trying to reduce the number of software, specifically in terms of some of the Microsoft products that have gotten more expensive. He talked about that next tier. They're not trying to remove software from any place that it's absolutely needed, right? What he's trying to do is consolidate those pieces so that where they're not being used effectively or efficiently and really aren't needed as an expenditure, they're removing them, right? So prior to Jason, we really didn't have this kind of capital improvement plan. Capital expenditure plan, right? So now that they're into their second year, they've really been able to identify where the need is and where it's not, and being able to remove some of the software is really doing a service to the community by not paying for things we don't need, right? And in many ways consolidating, like you said. Something else that they've done, I wanted to mention, is that they're really trying to aggregate the software under one roof and kind of control it all, if that makes sense. Sometimes the schools will go off and purchase software that hadn't been in the past under their purview, so certain aspects of the schools were doing their own thing. Now Jason's kind of working to consolidate all of that under one roof and really have a better understanding of who's doing what and why.
Duplication.
Yeah.
I gotcha.
So again, that's a cost savings to us.
Yeah.
One other point I'd like to mention, and this is something that's important. When we install a new server or firewall or something like that, in many cases, it takes a specialized knowledge to be able to install those items. We do that in-house here in Merrimack. Not every community does that. On average, that costs us about $8,000 to $10,000 for that installation process, just the installation alone, not including the $100,000 firewall or server, whatever it is. So thereby adding another cost savings that we're able to do this in-house, and that's really kind of a specialty. Thanks.
Brian?
Just a security question. Are we looking at like updating security? I don't know if the Power School breach and stuff had anything to do with us or if it really hit us. I just was trying to read up about it. Are we going to be looking forward into like any kind of extra security or anything to make sure that we're protected? I just think of my daughter's like My School Buck stuff, and we've mentioned that, and like everyone's credit cards numbers are on there and debit card numbers, a lot of personal information on there. I just didn't know what we were like. Are we secure? Are we going to be looking in the future to maybe purchase some better security? Or
Great question. Security is that never-ending battle, right? So every day we're always in that security brain, right? Like our net admin is definitely an advocate and is always looking into those things. I'm always looking into those things. So anything that we can do to harden what we have, doing our update, doing our firmware upgrades, you'll see like the firewalls that are in our budget and everything like that. Those help substantially. Also, to your point, all of our software that we have, almost all of it, there's some things like Adobe, for whatever reason, we can't get them to sign a data privacy agreement, but we need Adobe for a lot of our curriculum and whatnot. But we have them sign a data privacy agreement, right? So we're part of a consortium, and those companies it's a legal binding document. So they have to abide by these minimum standards that New Hampshire set forth. And not trying to talk too into the weeds, but it's mainly like following like NIST framework for security, and then you'll also hear like ISO certifications and whatnot. So the providers that we work with, when they sign that data privacy agreement, we're expecting them to do everything in their power that's by standard to keep everything as safe and secure as possible. Unfortunately, the nature of the way it is today, if a bad actor wants to get into something, they're going to find a way, whether or not you have the best stuff or not, right? Because we have those 0-day things. But every day we're looking into that. We're making sure that all of our stuff's hardened. Unfortunately, the Power School thing, that was a breach that happened by somebody outside of Merrimack, right? Somebody that got a Power School support person's credentials, so they can log into a portal that now had access to every Power School instance, and that was really, really unfortunate. Power School's going and doing credit monitoring and everything from that, but that was kind of a global incident. There are countries and whatnot. Yeah, it's too bad. It's unfortunate, but yes, we're always looking into that, making sure that our antivirus that we have is constantly updated, and we're looking at other things. The only thing, security is so expensive too. It's so expensive and hard to implement. But we're trying to do everything. Pick the software that is continually being in that magic quadrant that makes sense fiscally as well, right? But to your point, yeah, we're always looking at it, and we're trying to improve our stance as much as possible every day.
That's one thing. Just for your information, on our homepage, you'll see kind of in the middle section. Bill put this together with Jason's help. The important information regarding the Power School data breach. So if you click that link, you'll get all the details of what happened, how it happened, what we're doing, what services we're offering to people who think they've been compromised, etc. Mm-hmm. So it's all there. So you're welcome to take a look at that at your leisure. But it was a pretty devastating from a trust standpoint incident that happened. But I don't think there were any really hard data that was taken from the system, right?
Right. The really important thing was that we didn't store social security numbers in there. I mean, there's still the street addresses and other things, unfortunately, but the serial numbers is that big thing, because that's the thing that bad actors are looking for our young, young-aged individuals, because they can get in and they can do some stuff that, unfortunately, until they try to get a car or try to get a credit card or try to go and get some type of financial help or service, they won't know that anything happened. So thankfully, we didn't have social security numbers in there.
Naomi?
Just quickly, because it's related to Power School, I wanted to mention that Chair Peters and I were mentioned in the comment portion of the last school board meeting that we want to work with our legal counsel and the New Hampshire Attorney General's office in case there are any sort of class actions that come out of this Power School breach, and so that we're on top of anything there as well. So wanted to let everybody know that we're following up and we're taking it seriously.
Rachel, did I see your hand?
I just have a question, maybe two questions on page 4, the software and licensing technology. First one is the majority of that cost mostly from like the Microsoft and Google licenses, or is it more on the server firewall side? And then the follow-up to that would be, I see where you say you have Microsoft licensing and you're moving towards Google. So is the 82 to 64 for a combination of Microsoft and Google, or is it for one or the other?
Yeah, so for no matter what, we still need the Microsoft licensing, because like administratively, back end, the business side, we really need that. But that 84 down, that went down to 64, that was us removing unnecessary. now unnecessary licenses because we have Google and we have methods to do a lot, because it's still a very, very powerful tool, but the Microsoft side of things, they still need it. So we went through there and we scrutinized as many of those licenses as possible. For instance, like at elementary level, unfortunately, it's not a student license. It's based on your full-time, your FTE. That's the other side to that, is before the way that they did FTE, it was just only your full-time staff. But now Microsoft forces us to put even contractors that use it and all this other, like anybody that touches our data that in Microsoft, they have to be licensed. So we really scrutinize, like, oh, these contractors really don't need that. We're going to have them use the Google side, and we can actually govern that data even better, because it's going to be harder to just save on your computer. You put in Google, at least we have some type of record of that and whatnot, right? But there's some other things, like we have like imaging software, we have our ticketing software that's in there, but then we also have we do have some of the curriculum pieces of software that are in there. So there's some things that are $15,000, right? There's some things that are $10,000, and it unfortunately just adds up.
Dan?
Yeah, I have a serious problem with a zero line item that is transferred to another budget. And it's not just your budget, it showed up in the elementary budget also. That doesn't give us any history. It gives us a zero and a number over here and no history as to the whereabouts of where that number comes from. So I'm requesting that somehow we be able to trace where that number is, the history of it.
That might be something at the beginning of our budget committee meetings every year. We ask for, what were those changes that have been made, in the current year or something like that.
It's a red flag to me.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
It certainly brings questions. I have two, I don't see anybody else. I have two questions. What percentage of the tech budget is software that you pay for PEPM, basically per user, versus things that are assets that we pay for once and have basically have as an asset for a while?
Pretty much everything. I'd have to go through to verify 100%, but I would say if it's not 100%, it's like 98 or 99 perpetual. So okay. We buy it by some type of user count or device count, and it's a recurring cost. It's kind of the way that licensing, especially when everything went to the cloud, and businesses need to find another avenue for financial, to stay alive financially, right? We ended up going to this era of just perpetual license for everything.
I get it. I work at a software company.
Yeah.
We charge PEPM. It's like $90 per user. So, and the second thing is, I don't want to get into curriculum discussions, but it's a curriculum question. So when we have a line item that says we purchased X curriculum for $100,000, how do you forecast or project either the support pieces or other pieces related to that curriculum that you're going to have to continue to invest in over a number of years?
I work really closely with Amy for whenever she's going to be implementing anything. We make sure we look at it. Is this something that we can do with technology and whatnot? And what does that look like long term? And one of the nice parts of having the capital improvement plan is very rarely can we say we can't do something, right? And a lot of things being online in most school districts in the country are on Chromebooks, so most of the software vendors are doing things that are just web-based, can be done in Chrome. So for us on our side, it's an easier. It's pretty easy. It's web-based. We know that we can make that happen because all of our student devices are in our labs. You just need an internet connection for. But we look at everything. We also have a CIA committee meeting where if anybody wants to implement something new, there's a large group of people that go and ask questions and people present to it and whatnot. So it goes through a lot of eyes and a lot of thinking before something just kind of gets approved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that one of the recent curriculums that you chose was open source. I think that's huge because you have the freedom to use it without having to pay extra. And then to the continuity question that sort of came up is, I noticed as a parent over many years that, even just like, how do you inform the school that your child will be absent, right? Each school had a different process or a different software. And so I appreciate that you're kind of pulling that together and creating one or closer to one way to do things across the district. I think parents will appreciate that too.
Thank you.
Yeah, back in the day, just anecdotally, we had to go around during the summertime and collect the 5 1/4-inch floppy disks that each teacher had in their classroom to kind of wean them off of their personalized software stash. And that wasn't, huh?
You're aging yourself, Matt.
I know I am. That's all right though. And it was a challenge. That's all I can say. So Jason's done a heck of a job with this.
What do you foresee for one-to-one devices? I know we invested in those for COVID specifically. I know we do have a lot of software curriculum. I don't know if it necessarily is, research shows that children learn better off of software versus traditional methods, things like that. Is that something that you and Amy are sort of like looking at? Do we need to continue one-to-one devices across the whole district, or can we pull that back and just provide one-to-one devices for students who need them for accessibility? Like, are you considering any of those things to kind of limit our long-term technology investment?
Sure. Everything that we do, everything's always on the table, right? So we always constantly look at it, especially since technology changes so often. One thing that we do find is that, I hate saying the word COVID, but after COVID, right, we're seeing that the value in having that access to technology, right? So right now we're seeing that one-to-one makes a lot of sense, right? It's a really nice tool for, and it's a tool, right? Like, it's not like an entertainment device and whatnot. And getting to that point where we can show, like, this tool is very powerful and you can do amazing things with that. And going forward and continuing to build that, if we do see that it doesn't really make sense in pockets, like, we can talk about it and we look at it, because it is a big expense, and we also have to look at trends too, like, what makes sense, what does science say about X, Y, and Z. The one thing that we are finding that is a big proponent is that we do have a lot of online testing. So, and they're having that done at the younger levels, right? So whether or not we feel that one-to-one is good or not, or devices are good, or screen time is good, we are finding that testing, a lot of, like, state testing and assessment, it's all online now. We don't have the bubble sheets or anything like that. So that, yeah.
Now you're aging all of us.
So having access to that tool and showing your knowledge through that, we're finding that to be very important. And it's not going away. We know that technology is going to shift and morph, but we do constantly look at it, and we do question it because it is the right thing to do.
Thank you. Any other committee questions? All right. Thank you, Jason, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee,
Pleasure.
for your report.
Yeah.
All right. Next, I will invite Tom Tussaud up to the mic and again pass it off to Lee.
While Tom's coming up the mic, I hope you don't mind if I, sit here and keep him company. Tom and I work really closely every single day. He's in my office all the time. And I'll just tell you a little kind of a funny story. He always comes in with a little piece of paper all crumpled up. The smaller the piece of paper, the bigger the number is on the piece of paper as something that's gone sideways that we have to fix. Isn't that true?
True statement.
True statement. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me here, and I'm very happy to have Lee speak about my budget.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Tom and I have done this a couple times now, 2 or 3 times now for the maintenance. What strikes me initially in this meeting is that the amount of problems that they manage on a regular basis is astounding. And the juggling that they do with what limited budget that they have also speaks volumes to how good our school system, what kind of shape our school system is in currently. There are a laundry list of extra things that they would like to do moving forward, but just do not have the funds for. The biggest of which is O'Gara Drive, putting in a sidewalk all the way out to Bedford Road, which has been a challenge for seemingly a very long time to get done. So I applaud you for the amount of work and effort that you put into getting what you do get done. So thank you. You'll notice there are a couple of new items. Again, a sidewalk repair, the $22,500 to pressure wash and seal existing sidewalks at all the schools. Apparently, during COVID, that was going to be one of the projects that they were going to do, but because of COVID, they did not spend the money there. You'll see door replacement at $15,000. That may seem like a lot of money for some doors, but some of these doors are security, and they're not cheap, right? You're talking $800,000 for some of these doors. It's just absolutely insane. Additional cameras, $75,000. When did you start that program, Tom? A year or two ago?
The cameras.
Yeah.
Cameras for a number of years.
Yeah, the cameras.
The big push, though. Yeah.
The
big
cameras
push.
first started out years and years ago by a petition warrant article by a soon-to-be board member for around $200,000.
Okay.
That's how we got the cameras installed, and then Tom's been taking it over ever since, and it's been evolving over, I don't know, a decade and a half, 15 years. You know, we used to have analog cameras. Now we have IP cameras. Then you need new servers, and you need new wiring. You need everything like that. So it has been something that's been evolving, and it's been, one where we replace cameras or we add new cameras. We had a grant, the SAFE grant.
That's where I was going. The
Okay.
grant money came in, last year or the year before?
Came in last year.
Last year.
We're just wrapping it up this year with the installation. So it was a couple $100,000. So I applied for the grant, got the grant. We went forward. We had to spend a lot of money on the back end infrastructure piece. The servers were kind of downgraded.
That's where I was
from
going
what-
with this.
Yeah, okay. For what we were really needing. So that was paid for via a grant. And now it's time to flesh this out with some cameras. Even though there were cameras in that grant, they didn't include all the additional cameras we want to do. And I want to make mention that with all these cameras, Merrimack PD, they can dial in. So if there's a bad actor on the second floor of the high school and we know, they can look at them right away, so they have access.
Again, a lot of that grant money went to the back end,
The
not
back
to
end.
cameras specifically, but to the servers and et cetera, to really be able to take full advantage of the system and how it works.
Yep.
There's a line item for our contractors, or for, maintenance of the properties. We don't have the staff to fulfill the positions that we need for people to mow our lawns and do some of the maintenance that is required of all of our fields, et cetera. Matt is required by law to keep these positions open and available because they are union jobs. If Matt were to try and remove these positions or remove these funds from our budget, he would be sued almost immediately, and his licensing as a superintendent would also be defaulted. So as much as we'd like to remove these positions that aren't filled, he's required by law to do so. So that's a contractual obligation.
So we keep those positions open in the hopes of filling them because we want our own people working in our schools. Although the contracted service we did hire has done an excellent job, but we have to maintain these. So we're using the under expenditure in that line and using as an offset for another line that you're not seeing over here in this backup, but it's over expended by around $700,000. And so we're taking the underage in the salaries and we're applying it to the overage in the other line, which is the contracted service areas. And so it's kind of, right now, it's a wash. But we are keeping those positions open, and as we get enough positions, then we'll peel back on the contracted service. And I don't think it's going to be instantaneous. I don't know, Tom, when's the last time we hired a new custodian?
We have hired a couple new ones
Good.
this year, so we are making progress, although very slow, but we're making progress, and I think the last contract did help us to some extent.
Yes, because prior to that, I think Tom said it was like 4 years before we hired a new custodian. You know, so a lot of this work, it has to be done. You know, the DOE has standards, we have to meet them, so there's no choice.
Some of the other big ticket items that we talked about were electrical switch gears, which is something that was foreign to me. I wasn't familiar with what that was. That's the transformer when the power comes into the building and then gets redistributed. These switch gears are huge, giant boxes that sit outside the building or inside the building, and again transfer that voltage. Some of these have aged to a point where they're getting to a concern. New windows. We still need a bunch of new windows. The high school needs new windows. Some of the older elementary schools need new windows. And many of those windows are just that the locks or mechanical parts are no longer functioning. Right? So it's not even that they're old and need to be replaced. They just don't work. In the budget is a piece for mini splits. Most of our schools, in fact, all of them but the middle school, I believe, are not air conditioned. So on the second floor of any of these buildings that aren't air conditioned during the hot summer days or spring days, you feel a difference on that second floor. So with every budget cycle, you'll see an addition of about a dozen or so mini splits to attempt to address that long-term issue. They have looked at other ways to introduce that air conditioning, all of which are more expensive and a longer-term process, but it is something they continue to look at and try and do the best they can with what we have now. I'll have you talk about the Safe School program, but some of our playground improvements, the material that's used on our playground needs to be upgraded and replaced from time to time. So there's a budget line item in there. And then one other item that they would like to address is the sports field at the middle school. They tried a drainage fix, but it didn't quite work. They had hoped for a lower cost option to see kind of how that fixed the field and if it was going to do the job or not. It did not do the job successfully to the point where you'd really like it to. So there is a concept now to go in and do the more costly upgrade that is needed in that field. And most of that is due to its soil composition, which is clay. Many of the homes around here you'll see are on sand. If you dig up your yard a little bit, a couple feet down, you're going to hit sand, right? Unfortunately, that sport field happens to be on top of clay. So they're exploring the civil engineering to see what needs to be done so that field doesn't flood as easily. And those are some of the long-term improvements.
Yeah, that's not in this budget
No.
at all, but this is something that we wanted to give you like a snapshot into the future, because we had talked about that at the Budget Committee meeting a couple of years ago. In fact, Andy Hunter, who's a town councilman, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he was questioning us rather vigorously, let me put it that way. I appreciate Mr. Hunter, he's an awesome guy. But yeah, the first step was to see what we could do as far as a less expensive solution. Going to give that a couple of years, see how it played out. And I wanted to say, yeah, it's going to fix it, but I couldn't. So now we're going to have to look at something else. Because like Lee said, the base is clay, and clay doesn't drain, so you have issues with it. So we need to put in some infield drainage, and we need to spec out and have it designed by an engineering firm so it's done properly. When those fields were built, it's like a 30-foot cut in the side of a hill. 30-foot cut, 30-foot fill, softballs down below. What's the baseball, and then
There's
soccer
field,
is up
yeah.
top, and that's what. Field hockey. Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate that. I appreciate the assist. Yes. So that's the one. The top one is basically the one we really have to deal with right now. It's a beautiful field. It just, it just needs to stop raining in the spring so much.
Lee, do you have more to share, or are you wrapped up?
That's wrapped up. Yep. Thank you.
Tom, was there anything that wasn't mentioned that you wanted to mention before we go to committee questions?
I'm just ready for committee questions.
All right, let's open the floor. Dan?
I already asked you this question when I met you at Food Services. We had a number of the fields in the spring where our teams from this town had to play their home games at other fields. And you addressed that for me. I wonder if you'd address it now publicly so everybody could hear that answer.
Well, we talked about some of our issues with staffing. A lot of it was the weather or the environment that we deal with. When you're talking with, like, at the middle school field, it's just a field that holds water. During the winter and cold months, that's not good, because especially on the baseball fields, which there is a baseball field at the middle school, but if we move down to our varsity and JV field, that is on very good drainage, but until it dries out, you cannot work the field. So as we would like to get them ready as soon as we can, there's two factors. One, it's manpower. Two, it's the environment. So where we sit is very important. We certainly did extensive amount of work this year at the direction of the administration to try to get us in a better position where we were last year. So I think we took a number of steps, had a number of items done, and spent a lot of time on trying to get those fields ready. And I believe we're in a better position than we were last year at this time.
Yeah, we met with several of the baseball parents, and I want to tell you, they're a force. So we made sure that we took care of their needs, and I can understand what the issue was. We didn't have enough manpower, we didn't have enough labor, so we had to sub out a lot of that work.
And sometimes subbing out work isn't as easy as it sounds, because that work's it's already taken up. So it's just because someone says, well, go to someplace else and find labor. If you're looking for skilled labor, somebody who knows what they're doing, that's the edge. To find labor is okay, but to find the right labor takes a little bit of work. And sometimes that's unfortunately what happens. And I believe that we were not as far away as maybe the perception was, as far as on games and stuff, but we were delayed. I definitely give you that.
Dan, go ahead.
Now, you say you have staffing issues, and on social media, a number of members of this community have said they would come out and do those fields. Indeed, 40 years ago, I did the MYA fields for the years that my daughters were in it. My daughters are now 50 and in their 40s. So, but what keeps coming up is it's an insurance issue. And if it's an insurance issue, what are the offsets of paying whatever that insurance cost is and getting the labor to do what needs to be done? And I accept that you might not know that.
Well, I'm not sure about what the offset is, but you have to have a certified professional doing these fields. The days of you know, especially like with the playground and the mulch and everything like that. It's certified mulch, so it can withstand a fall of, you know, X amount of feet if it's such and such, and we get a certificate every year. You know, with the fields, when you have a certified professional go ahead and do it. And when we had our own grounds people, they were trained. We had some darn good grounds people, but you know something, they retired. You know, and we held on to one of them as long as we could. We didn't let him go, you know. But now he's saying, my gosh, I'm tired. I want to retire. So we had to let him go. But, you know, so yeah, it is much better to have a trained professional do that if there is an incident.
I'm not a trained professional, but I do cut greens and fairways and rough at a private golf course. So
Okay.
I really don't think there was a problem cutting the grass.
No.
That wasn't the issue. Most of our problem really did come from the fields not being ready to be worked. Unfortunately, you could have 1 million people. If your fields are not ready to be worked, they can't be. Because as we talked about in a meeting, if you're trying to turn up an infield and it's not prepared and it's not ready to be worked, you're basically making a bunch of potatoes. And that's just more work. I mean, sometimes it's a good idea, and we love to have volunteers, especially for cleanups and stuff like that. It's a great thing. But when we're actually trying to get the fields prepared for our athletes and to be safe, sometimes it's easier for us to do it ourselves. But we've had a lot of help through the years.
All right, I think we have Brian and Shannon, and did I see any other hands? All right, go ahead.
Do we look in town for contractors to do the work? I know there's a lot of highly skilled contractors in town who in turn have children in sports who I saw all over social media at the beginning. My daughter plays lacrosse. Like, there was people like, I'll do it. So there's an awful lot of people with decades of experience doing these sort of jobs, and I just don't know if we shop locally, because some of these people may be willing to give us a much better deal, and it keeps the money in the community instead of using outside architectural engineers or using outside businesses. I know of at least 3 that are more than qualified to install a field, that 30 years plus experience doing grounds and drainage. And
I think we're talking 2 separate things, but I like your point, and to go to your point, we have used contractors in town when we've had to use them for cutting the grass and stuff like that. The biggest delay that we had this year was on the baseball fields and softball fields, and that's all due to the prep of the fields. It's nothing to do with it. They weren't mowed on time. We did have some issues with some of the painting of the fields, which was a transition from an old staff to a new staff. We've solved that issue now and moving forward. So I don't see an issue right now of mowing and doing things like that. Preparing the sports field as far as the baseball and softball field, as long as the weather's there, I think we're going to be in a better place this year.
yeah, because that's why I was just speaking to, like, water diversion and like erosion control, and you said a lot of clay, so you got impervious material. It doesn't leach very well, so removing and doing all that dirt work is definitely something I know some people in town for sure
Yeah.
could do.
Our first option is always to see who is here in town that can help us out, you know, because usually, you know, you get a good price for them, you know, but in addition, they're vested in it because they live here in this community, and it's a sense of pride to them to say, look at that, you know, my company helped with that. We'll put a sign with your name on it,
You
you
can
know.
poke your neighbor's arm and say, hey, the field
Hey.
looks good today.
Right.
And I definitely think that's what we're taking advantage of too.
Yeah.
Because we do have a contractor that we're using for some services, and they are a local contractor, and they mention to me every time, you know, we take a lot of pride in this. And that's kind of like their byline, because they go, it's us. And it's kind of a good feeling.
Yeah, if it looks lousy, everybody knows who you
No.
are. so
Yeah,
it's fine.
Yeah.
You don't do it in your own backyard,
Yeah,
that's for
exactly.
Shannon?
I think everybody had the same questions that I had. Thank you.
Any other committee questions? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Good job. Thanks. I just want to say while we're making the transition, I can't say how much I appreciate Jason and Tom and Dave Zicke over the years. Been absolutely incredible to work with. I'm very privileged.
All right. I will like to ask the representatives from the Student Services Department to come to the table and pass it off to Gina.
All right, thank you. So we met on the 21st, and we met with Sarah Reinhardt and her team, and I do sincerely appreciate your flexibility with my schedule because I broke my leg saving a young child from a charging bull moose. So we had to move around the meeting several times. Yep, it is a good story, yep. And I also appreciate the committee members. I was a little bit strict in how I wanted the questions to be sent, and they did a really good job, and thank you to you, Sarah, for answering those questions. So I'm going to give a summary, and bear with me, and then any questions from the committee members, and I know there will be some that myself and Sarah can answer particularly. So, you know, and I wanted to give everyone a background because we throw a lot of terms around like FAPE and, you know, LRE and IEP, and for people that are not familiar with them, this is kind of a background as well. So for all of you who don't know, providing special education, along with being a moral obligation, is also a federal and a state law. And it's an obligation that we have to the students of Merrimack. The Federal Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which you may have heard spoken to as IDEA, provides that a FAPE, which is a free and appropriate public education, which includes not only academics, but the physical aspects of your school day and social emotional learning in the least restrictive environment, you may see it written down as LRE, in accordance with an individual's IEP, individualized education program. This begins at birth up to age 3 with early intervention services to eligible infants, toddlers, and their families. And they represent voluntary, family-oriented services to maximize a family's ability to understand and care for their child's developmental needs at a very young age. This is supported by NH Rule HE-M 510, which is the Family-Centered Early Support and Services, and it's enforced by DHHS. This continues on from age 3 to age 22, and it's supported by, and you'll probably hear this law a lot, NH Law RSA 186-C, which is led by the Department of Education. Now, the regulations and the guidelines for the state law can be found in Ed 1100 under the New Hampshire Standards for the Education of Children with Disabilities, but that just gives you a bit of a background on why we are mandated to provide special education. There are currently 775 students that qualify for an IEP during this school year compared to 773. But those numbers will ebb and flow as students come off an IEP and transition into one, so keep that in mind. We are comparable to Nashua and Londonderry. We're a little bit higher than Hudson, and our 775 represents about 20% of the student population in Merrimack. And, you know, I just want us all to keep in mind that when we do comparisons, such as comparing towns, that we really need to look at apples to apples. So we really need to compare those other towns that have a very similar socioeconomic profile and student number. Another thing I want to call to your attention is this section we were reviewing is called the Student Services section. It's not just the special education section. The Student Services budget targets not just Tier 2 students who qualify for additional support, such as MTSS, you might hear, multi-tiered student supports, but Tier 1 students as well. All students are regular education students first. There is a civil right and protection under federal law. Special education, things like 504s, etc., are additional services to regular education students to ensure that they have ability to access their federally protected right. Programs such as the one I just mentioned, the Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, or MTSS, as you'll often see written, provide interventions, both academic and behavioral, that's important to note, that are available to all students who may have learning or behavioral gaps to prevent over-identification in special education or those Tier 2 students. So Tier 1 students are defined as regular students who can access support for social and emotional learning and academic support as needed. Again, please keep in mind that all students benefit from Tier 1 supplies, which are included in this section, and they encompass the universal curriculum, as well as supplies for our universal behavior recognition systems and supplies needed by our school counselors, our social and emotional specialist, and social work staff who work with all students. The cost of Tier 1 supplies have increased and include such items as your second step, K-6 digital programs, replacement kits for K-5. Another example of a program is the CPI, Crisis Program Intervention, which is given and trained to both special education and regular education staff. So it's not just for special education. And as I mentioned before, you know, the numbers will flux because Tier 1 students will move in and out of these supports as needed. For students who are receiving special education, the IEP does dictate the resources, the accommodations, any modifications, and the paraprofessionals that are needed to ensure the student receives FAPE in the least restrictive environment. These cannot be altered as they are provision of the student's IEP. We did have several questions asking about the alternative usage of paras, but just so you know, per the IEP, you cannot detract or subtract from services. If a para is assigned to a child by the IEP, we are under obligation, we are under law to provide those services and the paraprofessionals indicated by that IEP. There were also questions about paras and co-curriculars, and I will refer to them as paras versus paraprofessionals, so I'm not long. This is an unfunded mandate, and we've seen a lot of those by the state, that all students should have access to activities, such as co-curriculars. So remember that FAPE pertains to not just academic, but also all aspects of the school day, which does include the co-curriculars that we offer after school. And for the paraprofessionals, there were a lot of questions about that. And, to clear up any confusion, paraprofessionals are employees of the district. Based on the labor and union contracts that we have between the support staff and the school districts, positions cannot be taken away. We've had questions as if the positions aren't filled, why are they still in the budget? We need to keep those positions open, even if we can't fill them, because the positions are needed to provide FAPE and to avoid labor violations. Therefore, there are no contracted para positions in the budget. When a position is required and cannot be filled through direct hiring, the district has to contract out. This cost appears as an over expenditure in a contracted service line and an under expenditure in a salary line. However, the money from the salary line is used to cover that overage in the contracted line. So, a more concrete example of this is, there's a para position that is a salary line that is required for an IEP, but the district cannot fill that with a direct hire with a district employee. Then that position has to be filled by a contracted service provider in order to meet the requirement of that IEP. However, that expenditure would be assigned to one of the contracted services line, for example, IEP assistance, and would show an over expenditure in the contracted line and an under expenditure in the salary line. And, Sarah and her team also wanted to point out that there is a difference in the definition of what an expenditure is and what an appropriation is. So it's really important that we remember the different purposes of these numbers if we want them to be compared. Again, we're always looking to do apples to apples. There are positions that are not in the union, and we have to contract out for them. So you'll see those in the budget as contracted positions. And, we're not unique in this, and that many other employers have seen nationwide that after COVID, people do not want to come back to work. And the school districts have had significant staff shortage since COVID. And there's a lot of cases where these professionals realize, hey, if I go with a contracted service or a vendor, I can not only get more money, but I can have greater flexibility working through them versus being employed directly by the schools. And again, that is a nationwide problem. So the positions that are not in the union include all the school psychologists, all but 4 speech pathologists, all but 4 speech and language assistants, all occupational therapists, all physical therapists, BCBAs, which are board certified behavior analysts, say that 5 times fast, teachers for the deaf and visually impaired, any type of orientation or mobility specialist, and your feeding and swallowing specialists. Now, contractors include, but are not limited to, Here to Learn, DTS therapy, Booth Bay therapy, just to name a few. Keep in mind that the Merrimack School District also has social and emotional learning specialists, and these were formerly called behavior specialists. There's 1 at each elementary school, and there's 2 at the upper elementary school. These specialists, the CEL specialists, are a regular education support accessible to all students, so to all Tier 1 students. And the Merrimack School District follows a multi-tiered system of support as outlined in the System of Care Expectations, again, mandated by New Hampshire and the NHRSA 135.f. I promise there won't be a quiz on this. So this includes all students in grades K through 8 receiving universal preventative and proactive instruction and skills that address the characteristics of a learner on the report cards as behavioral expectations in school. All the students requiring intervention beyond the universal programming can be selected based on multiple criteria, including discipline referrals, attendance concerns, or even by parent request. If anyone has watched or attended past school board meetings, the school board has asked the administration to do a study on hiring in-house school psychologists versus contracted service providers. And, when we do that, when we look at that kind of comparison, we need to consider all aspects of cost, because although the rates are higher for contracted specialists, we don't have other costs baked in, such as benefits, retirement, etc. Now, we talked a lot about the unfunded mandates. What type of, assistance are we getting? So special ed aid, formerly catastrophic aid, is not a reimbursement to the special education budget directly, which is something that I did not know. This money is received by the school district as a revenue a year in arrears. Therefore, it can't be a factor in the development of our budget, but it is a result of the time and effort of staff to submit for reimbursement. And it's not a simple click of the button. There's many steps involved, which is, one of the reasons why we're asking for additional administrative support to document our special education services, behavioral, for Tier 1, and also to help with, the documentation of all of this information. Districts don't know, as far as budget predictions, what the percentage of the special aid reimbursement will be ahead of time. This is determined on an annual basis by the state, and it's not given as of January 1st or a specific date. So they are kind of flying blind in that way and have to rely on that, really quality documentation. For example, this year, and I think we've heard a lot about it, that the reimbursement percentage was at an all-time low. We have applied for the Promising Futures Grant, which is based on social and emotional learning. It's not special education per se. And we do this every year, but unfortunately we were not selected this year. And, we do intend to apply for it next year. And we also work very closely with the New Hampshire Education Department, which allows us early awareness of any upcoming funding opportunities. So we're always constantly looking for ways that we can, supplement funding. The school board, again, has asked administration to explore other ways that we can partner with the community to lower the cost of student services, as again, many of the mandates are unfunded, but the district still has a moral and legal obligation to provide FAPE in the least restrictive environment. There were also questions over the out-of-district placements. please keep in mind, for the purpose of the budget committee, we don't have any say in the out-of-district schools or the facilities that are selected by the professionals based on the specific students' needs. We did ask for information about those, but again, it's a FERPA violation because we only have 23 versus 20 last year of out-of-district placements. It is impossible to divulge information without giving away the student's identity. So this past year, I just mentioned, we increased from 20 to 23 out-of-district placements. And please keep in mind that some of these we have inherited by way of students moving into Merrimack. So it's not that we specifically, it's something that, FAPE couldn't be, done in the least restrictive environment, and we've worked with them. We have inherited them because they have moved into Merrimack. Okay. These out-of-district numbers will ebb and flow as students age out, and, students can also move out of Merrimack as well. This was actually a really interesting fact that I learned, was that the DHHS can place kids into an out-of-district placement purely based on behavioral assessments. In some instances, they did not go through the court, so these kids were not court-ordered, but placed directly into the school systems by DHHS. The schools, including our schools, had absolutely no say as to why they need to pay for these state-mandated out-of-district placements. And the state requires that the school districts pay for that educational portion of the tuition up to the mandated educational cost per student. So in order to combat some of that cost, we instituted a cap, and in this case, it's an amount of $68,000, which is only the educational portion of the out-of-district placement for the year. And that cap goes towards both a behavioral placement by DHHS and when they also go through the court system. So our district can get, or any district can get reimbursed for an amount over the cap, which is at $68,000, based on, again, those documentation of services through, and you'll see this a lot, the New Hampshire Special Education Information System. I don't know how you say the acronym, I'm not going to try. Which all schools are required to enter in 16 to 17 data points because the states track the services provided for the IEP services. So again, we really need that solid documentation for reimbursement as well in order to know also what type of services we need. So once you factor in the items that are disallowed by the state, and of course there always are some, if we receive any money back, it actually doesn't go to the school district to the school fund, it goes to the town fund. And a lot of questions have come up about data comparison, about the increases over the past years. And, I don't think I need to remind everyone that this was really an unusual past 5 years. COVID was unforeseen. And, it's not really a good reference to compare numbers from COVID and post-COVID to where we are now. There are significant staffing shortages that have occurred because of COVID and increased student needs. So there were increases across the nation. It wasn't just Merrimack, from 21 to 22 and 22 to 23, which encompassed a lot of compensatory services to make up for the fact that special education could not be really provided in the way it was intended to during COVID when these students were at home. So the district needs to contract help because there was such a significant staffing shortage, especially in school settings. Also, and I can attest to this personally in my own household, there were an increase in behavioral instances where, students returned to school, they had trouble adjusting, they were trying to process all the things that were going on. It was hard enough for the adults to process what happened during COVID, but imagine our students as well. And so those type of behavioral instances fall under student services. Again, Tier 1, anyone can experience a behavioral instance. And, also keep in mind that when, again, my apples to apples soapbox, when we compare New Hampshire to other states, we have to take into account that other states have different costs of living, they have different funding resources for education and for their special education. So I want to sincerely thank Sarah and her team and my committee members for providing such thoughtful questions and for being very open to discussions. And we literally, they were like trying to run out the door to a 12 o'clock call. It was 11:59, like 53 seconds. We're like, wait, but it's open our questions. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate it.
Are there any questions from the committee? Brian?
Is there a cap on the amount of students, like 20% of the population of students? Is there ever a cap? Like you said, people are moving in from out of town, and the more and more people that move in, obviously, if they're needing IEPs or 504s, it's just going to keep swelling the special ed. Is there any, like, end game? Is there any time we can say, sorry, we're no vacancy? Like there's eventually going to hit a point. I mean, it makes me reminisce to Massachusetts, which is why I left there, because their welfare system got so loose and so open and so welcoming that it got so overburdened it collapsed, because it was just, it was everybody got some point of view, which is, it's great for a little while, but then it's just unsustainable. So if we have people that are moving here specifically for the quality of our special education, if that keeps growing and growing and more people begin to move here, it's like there has to be some way to say finally that we just can't do it anymore, like, because we're already struggling now, obviously, to find the correct people to cover everything, we're contracting out a lot of money because we can't find people that we can retain full-time. So eventually the bucket's going to run dry,
So it's a compliment to our really exceptional special education staff that we have here in Merrimack, that Merrimack is known for high-quality special education. So I just want to point out that to the staff members that do incredibly hard work for
yes,
children.
Yes, there was no insult. That
no,
was a
not
compliment.
At all. Absolutely. Towards your point, no, there is no such thing as a no vacancy sign for special education. It is a federal law and state law, and also we do have a moral obligation to educate all children. What becomes very important when we think about special education is what are our tier 1 and tier 2, that MTSSB, that multi-tiered systems of supports that we can provide for children early, so that way we don't see gaps and grow and deficits that grow that then become educational disabilities. So that high quality instruction, the SEL support, the behavioral learning, that MTSSB really does have an impact on special education numbers and cost. In addition to that, following that special education process as outlined in the standards for the education of children with disabilities is very important. And we often hear parents, and things change over time, especially during COVID, their school districts are really struggling to understand, how do we recognize a disability versus someone who didn't attend school for a year and a half, right? And so we did see an increase in numbers across the state, across the nation. Well, we're starting to move beyond that. So we do anticipate that our referrals will continue to go down and to become back to probably those pre-COVID numbers as we're able to really have high quality instruction, other supports, and now have time to say, this isn't a disability, this is related to not having access to education for a year and a half.
And also having a child with in the special education system, there are very specific evaluations and assessments that they have to go through, and definitely not every child is selected for special education services. So there are very stringent expectations, there are very stringent criteria on if they can or can't be accepted. So while it may seem that we have a lot, when we look at cities that are, close to us, it's comparable, but again, we can't put a cap. It's a federal and it's a state law, but it's not welcoming arms. I mean, you have to prove that that your child needs those services to qualify for not just the tier 1, but the tier 2 support.
Dan?
Turn it on, it goes off. I could use your services. No, I can relate to you very, very, very much. My oldest daughter is an SEL specialist. My oldest granddaughter is a contracted para. My youngest granddaughter in this school district has an IEP. She was adopted from China. And I understand that she's going to test out of it. So I thank you.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you.
Mackenzie?
And I guess I'll go off of Dan's point. How many students do you find that, based on their goals in their IEP, that they are able to meet their goals and you're able to wean them off of their IEPs each year, I would say?
So that is a really fascinating question, and it's one that we get a lot. So when an IEP is crafted, it is designed for a student to meet their goals, right? To progress to the next year. Typically, we say that when a student is found eligible for special education, they'll be reevaluated and go through the series of those evaluations in the next 3 years. And then we go, okay, where are the students from that point forward? Do they continue to be eligible? And if so, how does it look? What we typically find is that in the younger years, we see more students continuing on in special education because those are where our really formative skills are. And that's where we have to put a lot of time and attention and specialized instruction. As we get older, we see more kids being discharged, is the phrase, from special education. But it's really hard to tell because it's varied upon the student. It's varied upon the disability, how the student responds. I am a parent of a child who also is in special education. She's been in special education since she was referred in kindergarten. And so has her needs changed over time? Absolutely. Has she made progress? Absolutely. Is she eligible for discharge? She is not. Do I wish she was? Of course, because having a disability does make life more challenging for students. So we do work towards, and we constantly monitor and review progress to make sure kids are making progress towards their educational goals. It's also important to note that while I know it feels kind of like we talk about it a lot, the COVID impact has really affected the ability to make progress. Many districts had parents that didn't bring their kids in or chose remote services, and we know, and we learned later, that that did have an impact. So we're still working through that as we move forward.
Matt?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say, if there is one area in this entire operating budget that should be fully funded and gives people like me the most bad dreams in the middle of the night for fear of running into a deficit, it is special services. Because of the volatility of it, the nature of it, you can have 2 or 3 out-of-district placements that walk into through your doors. You haven't anticipated them, and they could have upwards of $200,000 to $300,000 each in like a residential placement. And the catastrophic, the special ed aid. I'm going back to years gone by, catastrophic aid. But special ed aid, you get an indication of what you should get as a revenue. If you take the full amount and book it as a revenue and you're going to receive that, more than likely you are not going to get that. You have to know people at the DOE who will give you an indication whether or not the state is going to fully fund it. And in my experience, I've gotten answers like, they're going to only fund this at 60%. You're due X amount, but we're only going to fund it at like 60%. So that's what you put in there. And there are some districts that get fooled with the numbers that come out. They put that in there, and there's a number of districts right in this state, very close to us, who have gone upside down in their bottom line of their budget because they underestimated the revenue coming in for the state, and they underestimated the revenue, and they didn't budget appropriately for the expenditures that they were going to get.
Mackenzie?
And then my last question was, do you just happen to know off the top of your head how many of our students also require like a one-on-one aid?
That's also a very good question. I want to just share real quickly that if you require, as a student, to access your free and appropriate public education, a one-to-one special education paraprofessional, that's considered a very restrictive service. And it really is what we consider a service because we need to ensure that a student has very intensive programming that is implemented. So isn't something that I think when we talk about it, it feels like it's a very common thing. Oh, this student's going to have a one-to-one and a dealt with them all day long, right? We recognize that in that least restrictive programming, it's what every other student's day looks like, and then we start to add more layers of complexity onto that through the IEP process. However, unfortunately, that would be information that would be, I feel, identifiable for student records, from student records, so it is protected under FERPA. But I will definitely say it's not as high as I think we like to think it to be.
Marie?
I actually have a couple of questions. One of them is about what is referred to as MOE, apparently. And the fact that districts have to have maintenance of effort. And I'm wondering, is that per student or per district?
I love the maintenance of effort form. It's like 27 pages long. It used to be 2 lines on a sheet. And as you go on in your career, government adds more paperwork and more paperwork and more paperwork. Anyway, the maintenance of effort looks at, what was your student count with IEPs? Okay, and if it was the same year to year, they know the costs are going to go up. So they're going to look at, did you budget more for next year than you did for the current year you're in? And did you spend more out of your general fund? And if you didn't, they're looking at the grant that you get, IDEA, which is around $994,000, and they're going to say, you're supplanting. You're taking the federal money in order to reduce your spend on the general fund. So you are not following the proper procedures of funding special ed accordingly. Therefore, you are not making maintenance of effort. You have to budget more if you have the same number of kids. You can, if you drop like 100 kids, your budget can go down and your expenditures can go down. But if you're around the same amount, and we've been around the same amount for a while now, you have to make sure that every year you have an incremental increase in the amount you expend.
So Matt and I work very closely on this because it matters, and so
Matters a lot.
It matters a lot in terms of if we are considered to have supplanted, to use federal funds to replace what the district is required to spend on all their children, then we have the potential to lose some of our IDEA funding. So there's a whole, and Matt isn't joking when it's 27 pages. If we have a loss of students, I have to go in there with Matt and we have to fill out, this is how many students we lost, this is why. It was very common for school districts during the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we had the shutdown time and many districts didn't pay the busing or they didn't pay contracted providers. It was very common to suddenly have this huge drop in your expenditure. So then we had to go in and say, here are our receipts, here's what we didn't pay, here's why, please don't take our funding away.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question about 504s. How many students do we have on 504s?
I don't directly oversee 504, so that is a number I can absolutely
That's
get
me.
for you.
I got it.
You got it?
Yeah. 478.
Okay. So 775 on IEPs and 478 on 504s. Because in Gina's report was mentioned that over a third of the IEPs include a behavior component. And one of the things that I did notice in all of my liaison meetings, actually, that student behavior was sort of a theme that you're having to deal with since COVID, a lot of student behaviors. And I think in the referrals you had for 504s, something like half or 2/3 of them have at least an ADHD component. So I was wondering, do you anticipate that kind of reversing itself with all of the interventions?
So I just Can I answer and just separate out real quickly the
Yeah,
special education
please.
from the 504? So the special education piece, and I think it had been in our conversation around how many students access a board certified behavioral analyst, which addresses behavior, it addresses data collection, students that have very complex needs that need to be tracked in terms of following behavior plans. And we had said we think about a third of our students, just roughly, access that particular support. Those are the BCBAs. The question about the students who receive 504, so New Hampshire does have one of the highest rates in the country of students who are found eligible for 504. That is a New Hampshire statistic, and that's about as far as I can dig into that one at this moment. But I will say this, they tend to be referrals for ADHD and also anxiety. And so when we say behavior, to clarify, it's not necessarily disrespectful behavior. It could be an inability to maintain their own space. It could be an inability to have to learn self-control or self-regulation. It's those skills. And so part of that multi-tiered system of supports is to teach all students those skills and to say, okay, if I have a student that really struggles with just the inability to raise their hand, right? Because they're very impulsive, they want to answer, they're having a hard time following classroom rules. There's teaching that can happen in there. They may still require a 504 because the 504 is about access and accommodations. They don't require special ed because they don't require specialized instruction. They do require teaching and an additional teaching and support to address that issue and continue on with their access to education. Does that help?
It does, and I'm thinking that you probably are seeing that the interventions are addressing this, and that this is getting better as we're getting more distance from COVID.
Well, I don't have the actual data in front of me to say this is the number of referrals, this is how it changes.
Yeah.
And also I want to recognize that how we record disciplinary referrals can change from year to year. So we may not, towards your point, Gina, be comparing apples and apples. Because we are using high quality programming, because we are providing these interventions for children, we do see children responding to the interventions and being able to access with less disruptive behaviors their regular classrooming.
Okay. And there was just one other weird little thing that I noticed in my reading of the budget book. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when a student is getting support for co-curricular activities or has an out-of-district placement and has transportation to those, that we actually pay parents to transport their children to those?
So the school district, if a child is a child with an educational disability and the IEP team has determined that that child's disability impedes their ability to access transportation the way all students would receive it at Merrimack, which in this case is because we provide busing, which is a fantastic thing that we do. The IEP team would then say, okay, that student requires specialized transportation. And so that's what the transportation appears in the student services. If a child is placed in an out-of-district placement through the school district, not through behavioral health, which is DHHS, or the court system, if the school district says we're going to place a child at an out-of-district placement, the only way to access that is for school district transportation. And so we would provide specialized transportation. There are times, and that includes to a co-curricular activity. If the way a child accesses a co-curricular activity for all students is the parents bring them, then that would apply for special education students too. If, however, all kids get a bus and this student requires specialized transportation, then the district would provide a bus. We also know that transportation has very much been an issue since COVID. Prior to COVID, there were multitude of extra bus drivers. Bus companies would call and say, Sarah, do you need someone else? We can compete. Right now, we can't find bus drivers. We can't always create new routes in a timely fashion. And so if that situation occurs, the district will say to the parent, we are securing transportation. In the meantime, if you transport your child, we reimburse you at the IRS rate with the proper documentation and forms for that transportation. But that is a very, very narrow, limited to ensure a child can access their free and appropriate public education while the district is providing and creating transportation.
So it's a stopgap measure?
It's a stopgap measure.
Okay.
And I want to just be very clear, because I did hear that somewhere too, after you mentioned that.
Yeah.
And I actually had someone say, well, you can just pay parents instead. No, the district has an obligation when it's part of FAPE to provide the transportation.
Yeah, because I was thinking of the small buses and vans that I've seen. Yeah,
Yes.
okay. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome.
Mackenzie?
As we've talked about, like the out-of-district placements, just so everyone kind of has an understanding of when that specifically would be needed, can you give like a hypothetical example? And then I guess my next point to that too is, have we or do we, I guess, evaluate our own programs and professional development opportunities we provide to our staff in order to better meet the needs of our students, so that we don't need to necessarily, I guess, not spend the funding to place those students out of district, but how often do we look at that, I guess, would be my question.
So for a hypothetical, I'm going to use my own child, and then I'm going to modify her educational programming, because I want to be very clear that no parent should be sitting in an audience thinking she's talking about my child, my grandchild. So just know this is my own child, and I've modified her disability, okay? My child is hearing impaired. She is considered legally deaf. So if her hearing were to continue to deteriorate to the level in which she could not hear with hearing aids anymore, the school district in which I live would have to say, what is a free and appropriate public education for her in the least restrictive environment? Can they provide a sign language interpreter that would allow her to interpret the classes? Perhaps they could. However, could she have access to her peers? Probably not. Could she get the lunch? Could she get her lunch? Probably not. Could she hear the announcements? Probably not. Could she hear videos? Probably not. So the school would have to then come back to the table and say, okay, Sarah, we have tried all these different interventions. We've tried a sign language interpreter, but she hasn't learned sign language, so this is problematic, right? We've tried all these different things. The next least restrictive option for her is a school for the deaf, because then they can provide her specialized instruction. And that would be her least restrictive environment. And so I use that because that's a very good, I think a very clear example. The school district, we try everything we can to make sure children can access their public schools, because all children are regular ed children first. All children have the right to access the Merrimack Public Schools when they live in Merrimack. That is their right. However, there are times when we are not able to, because, as in Sophia's case that I just described, the needs are so great that we can't modify the environment to address the students' needs. And when that happens, we go, okay, we have to look at an out-of-district placement. Then as the director, I'm involved in those situations. Those come to me. We do have an out-of-district coordinator, but I know that. I know who's a potential to head out of district. I know what potential services we've put in place. I've spoken to the business administrator. I've spoken to Mr. Olson. So this information, I know what we're thinking, so I can go, here are some additional resources. Let's try these additional resources to see if the student can access their public school, because this is their community. But if they can't, we have to say the next least restrictive environment for them is an out-of-district placement. So to use Sophia's example, if she was in the Merrimack School District and I was the director, we would place her out of school for the deaf. And then I would look to my coordinators and I would say, okay, let's look at how many other kids we have coming up that are hearing impaired that may need this. Do we need to provide some kind of specialized instruction? Do we need to provide some targeted instruction? Do I need to bring in a teacher of the deaf to train the staff? Because I will tell you, when kids have very complex disabilities, that staff training, not just special ed, but regular ed, is essential. So when we see some unique services like a teacher of the deaf, they become very important to teaching students and staff how to help students access. So my own child has been told, take out your hearing aids. If this is too loud for you, you don't really need them anyways. You'll be fine. So these are really important trainings that we provide, and that was regular ed staff that we provide all staff. So yes, absolutely. And we do that on a regular basis. I meet with the coordinators every other week as a group, and then I go to the schools on those off weeks. And we talk about different situations. We talk about different training needs. We looked to see what can we provide to make sure children are able to have a free and appropriate public education in our school. Mackenzie, did that answer? Thank you.
Brian?
Does Medicaid pick up any of the costs of any of this?
They used to. That was a program that you could count on. Kind of like building aid. For like decades, it was like there. And now they've kind of changed a lot of the rules and regulations behind it. And we're kind of limited in the funding that we get from Medicaid.
And it's going to continue to change and
Yeah.
become more restrictive.
Is there any reason why we don't have families use their own private insurance for some of the specialists, doctors, psychologists, things like that?
So if the IEP team determines it's needed to provide a free and appropriate public education, then the school district must provide it. There was a time when schools would say to parents, access your private insurance. Go get that neuropsych through your private insurance. But the IEP team really needs it. Those days are long since past because it's been recognized, litigated, and reinforced that if the school district says the student needs this evaluation to determine about their free and appropriate public education, we have the obligation to provide it. There is a difference, though, between us providing as a school district what a child needs for education versus what they might need for medical needs. My daughter has an educational audiologist that deals with her equipment. Her mic, by the way, just to give you an idea of costs when Matt talks about costs in special ed, is $9,000. It broke at the start of the school year. So they needed a new one. It was no longer $9,000. It was like $12 to $15. But without the mic, she can't access her education. So they had to go and find a new mic. If I change her hearing aids, that mic may not work. Even if they just bought it, they may have to get a new one. So towards your point, the school district has an educational audiologist that they provide for Sophia through her IEP. She does only education. I pay for the audiologist that does her hearing aids and all those needs. I pay for her hearing aids. If I want to get her a neuropsych, I pay for that through my insurance because the school district met their obligation with their evaluations. And so we have to separate out. And as parents, sometimes it's really hard because I'm like, hey, I want you to do this. Could you make it easier for me? You know, I can't get in. You've got a better relationship with the doctor. But that's not their responsibility. Their responsibility as a school district is education only. And so we go to keep those costs, towards your point, reasonable. What's the district responsibility and what's my responsibility as a parent? And they aren't always the same things.
Thank you. Mackenzie?
I have one last question, sorry. On page 22, the ESOL supplies items line increased by about $1,000 overall. How many students participate in that program, like across the district? And with all of the apartments now in town, do you foresee that population will begin to increase?
I don't know how many, but yeah, it's probably going to increase. Amy sneaking up?
Yeah, I sure am. So it's interesting. Some of the things that, Sarah and I work really closely, I do anything that's student services but regular ed. So if you think about 504, ESOL, McKinney-Vento, or the homeless students. So to answer your first question, right now on our roster, we have 131 students that are English language learners. 98 of them receive direct service, and 33 of them are monitored status. So there's a period of time where students get direct service, and then they do a test called the Access Assessment. It's a statewide assessment. You may have got a notice from me recently that window opened. So we're required to assess those learners every year to see if they're making proficiency towards their English language development. To answer your question, Mackenzie, I would say that we will continue to see an increase. Every year since I've been here, that number has gone up. Back in 2019, we had about 95 students on our roster, but only 70 receiving direct service, and that number has continued to go up every year. Answering a question earlier about translation services, our highest language here is Spanish, closely followed by Portuguese, and it's harder and harder to get the right kind of interpreter or translator for Portuguese because there's so many different dialects. So, today I was, working with a different service out of Massachusetts because we just have more and more need. So I do think it'll continue to go up. So that $1,000 in supplies, we'll use it.
Other committee questions? Marie?
I don't know for sure if I'm allowed to ask this, but who is on an IEP team? You referred to an IEP team. And I remember who was on it when I was a teacher, but it may have changed.
At its most basic core, an IEP team, the legal requirements are the parents or the adult student, a regular ed teacher of the child, a special ed teacher of the child, and a person identified as the local educational area representative who has the ability to make decisions for the district. And those are the coordinators or myself. Now, we also, as a school district, decide if there are other people who have knowledge of the student. So that can attend or that need to attend.
Mm-hmm.
So I have an IEP team meeting coming up because I have some concerns about the school district's lack of implementation of my daughter's accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need the speech pathologist there. I don't need her PT. I don't need her OT. I need the regular ed teacher, the special ed teacher, and then I've asked the district if they are available, could they please include the teacher of the deaf and the educational audiologist? The district can say yes or no if they think that's appropriate because they create that team.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how an IEP team is made.
Okay, so to make the decision that a student is on an IEP and to design that IEP, what's the mechanics of that?
Do you mind if, okay, I just want to make sure. 'Cause
Is it
this is a little more, yes, I was trying to think, how do I
All right.
shrink that down? And I'm happy to meet and talk about this or create a presentation if that's easier. So basically, the very short version is this.
Yeah, the short version is good.
Anyone can refer a student to special education. Once that referral is received, the school district has 15 business days to convene what's called a disposition of referral meeting. At that meeting with the people we just talked about, the classroom teacher of the child, a special ed teacher who may or may not know the child, right, because that child is not in special education yet, the LEA representative, the parents, and the child if appropriate, that disposition of referral IEP team says, do we suspect an educational disability? That's all it has to say. And if we don't, here are some other resources to do. If we do, then the standards for students with disabilities very clearly describes the evaluations that need to be done. And then we say, okay, the district asks for consent. Parents can say yes or no. That is their right in New Hampshire. There is no ramification if a parent says no. In other states, that's a call to DCYF. In New Hampshire, it is not. So the evaluations are done, and then the team comes back together, because once we receive consent, we have 60 days, calendar days, mind you, so that includes vacations, holidays, all those things, to come back together to look at that data to determine if a child has an educational disability. And what we call deliberation forms, which come out of IDEA, and the team just goes down the form and says, were the necessary evaluations completed? Does the child meet these different outlined criteria? Is this an issue due to lack of education? And sometimes we have to say yes. And does the child need special education? On top of being hearing impaired, my daughter is also neurologically dyslexic, which means she doesn't know left, right, up, down. It's really lovely when we're in Disney and I say take a left and she's off in a different part of the park, right? So she's neurologically dyslexic. Is math always going to be hard for her? Yes. Does she continue to have a specific learning disability in math? No, because we can't remediate it any more than we've already done. So she remained eligible for her hearing impairment, but not for her specific learning disability in reading, writing, and math, because that's been remediated. And then that team, the district, the LEA, is the one who's going to say, this is the decision of the district, because sometimes teams can disagree. And we've seen it. Sometimes teachers are like, absolutely, I know this child is incredibly disabled, and the results come back and go, actually, we don't see that. We see other things. So that's why we have that LEA who's going to then state for the district's position, and then parents can respond as they feel necessary. And then the process continues from there, and every 3 years we come back to the table. Is that like the shortest version ever?
That was a great version. The only difference I see over the many years is the LEA.
Yes.
And that's like the person who ties it all together.
Correct. And the LEA is very important because that is the person that's saying, they tie it all together, right? They kind of have the wizard hat. They ensure the process is followed. And as you know from looking at the budget, special education has cost to it. So it's important for 2 reasons. One, we go, are we saying this is not a school district responsibility? So we're only doing school district responsibilities. And 2, are we educating children in the least restricted environment? Because children are entitled to not have an educational disability if they don't as well. So we spend a lot of time training and working with the LEAs, our coordinators, to say, this is how you go through the process to ensure the rights of a child. They have the right to special ed if they need it. They have the right to not be in special ed if they do not have an educational disability.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mackenzie?
2 more questions, sorry. On page 9, I noticed that the specialized staff training went down from 24,000 to about 3,000. And I did notice that was based on the amount of staff members that had required the training. How many had required training in the prior year compared to now? And how often do they have to go back and fulfill the required training?
So actually this line right here, as the business administrator and I have been deciding how to utilize our grant, what we want to keep in the local budget, what would not be considered supplanting. One of the things that is not supplanting is specialized training for staff. So we decided to allocate those funds to the IDEA grant. So we do provide consistent and ongoing specialized training for staff around the special education process, around different levels and different types of students with different disabilities. We provide it to para-educators, teachers, speech pathologists. It's our entire special education department.
Great, thank you. And then the last question I had was on page 3 in regard to the co-curricular activities. Again, that went from 10,000 to 23,000. Are there more students participating in that, and that's why that line item went up?
Yes, and it's my understanding that there's also more co-curricular activities being offered as, again, I say this, we come back from COVID and there's more co-curricular activity opportunities.
Thank you.
Any other committee questions? Marie?
When did we implement the SEL curriculum? How many years have we had it?
That's a very interesting question. I can absolutely look into that and get back to you.
Okay.
Do you mean the second step, or do you mean the SEL specialist?
When did we implement SEL? When did that begin? I mean, is that?
I guess I would say that character education has been part of the 306s, which are the minimum standards, since their inception. So that's part of the requirement. And so how school districts have implemented that is a variety of different ways. But if you're asking about the second step curriculum specifically, I think that was adopted, Julie DeLuca, 2018? 17, somewhere around there? Pre-COVID. I've got some teachers helping me out. I wasn't here at the time, and I know that, Naomi knows. We're going to phone a friend here.
I don't know the exact year. However, it was when my now 8th grade son was in maybe 1st grade we started getting stuff come home about it. It's been a long time.
7 years. 2018, we had it at one school, then we piloted it, but full implementation K-5.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Marie?
Thank you.
Sure.
So I have just a general question, and I don't want to go into the line items, but in our book, we have the budgeted, expended, budgeted, proposed, right, over the last couple of years. And then we have a blurb that says, this is what these funds are for. But what we don't have is some sort of an explanation of why some are budgeted much higher, some are budgeted much lower. I think maybe one of those explanations was just given, like, oh, we have a grant, so we're putting that towards this, so we're not reducing those services, we've just found other funds, et cetera. Something that I think would be beneficial for this committee would be for you to give us some sort of an understanding of how you came to the proposed number for next year's budget, considering the volatility in the numbers. And maybe it's volatility in the number of kids who need services, or the types of services that we need, et cetera. But there's no explanation in any of these line items that helps us as a budget committee say, should we level fund this or not? Or has this been level funded for the last couple of years and I see a spike and here's why? I think that's kind of what a lot of the folks on the committee this year are looking at is, what's reasonable? And we don't know because we don't know kind of the behind the scenes.
I can give you the quick answer, if that helps. So it's mixed. There's, depending on the line, there's multiple reasons. So let me do the easiest one, which is the out of district. So as students age up, if you'll notice, the out of district lines are done by age groups. So if I'm a student, so if my daughter was placed out this year in middle school, and next year when she goes to high school, that money would be moved from one line to the other in the budget. So the numbers increase as students age to from elementary to middle to high. So that's why the out-of-district lines tend to flow like that. There's not necessarily, we received 4 students, so we see this line get $400,000 higher, making that up. It's because we go, oh, we have a student at this grade level, we have multiple students at this grade level, some move to the next one. So the money follows the student so it can be as accurate when the business administrator and I look as possible. So that's how those are. When it comes to contracted service lines, to be clear, there are no paras in the contracted service lines. We don't include them. What I do is look at our contracts for our speech pathologists, our OTs, our PTs, our BCBAs, our educational audiologists, and I say, this is what it is this year. If we have a multi-year contract, this is what it's set to be. If we say, we don't know, I have students that move in and have suddenly a need for more educational audiologists, I might go, okay, this is going to increase. So, because we're budgeting for students who are dynamic beings over a year out. So that is how we do it. I speak to the coordinators, we look at what their trends are in their buildings, and then we make those determinations. Also, the business administrator and I, to make things sometimes easier or clearer, we might decide to reallocate something to a different line, where historically it's been located in one, but we reallocate it to another. But really, when I sit down and then when I meet with the business administrator and Mr. Olson, you can see, I can't share it with you because it's got names on it, but you could literally see this is the anticipated cost, this is how much this is anticipated to raise, and then it's literally done out by line like that.
I heard a potential comment.
It goes back to the Medicaid. Is there any way we can see, because it's not a zero number, is there any way we can see what the reimbursement was from Medicaid, or is that like a hidden number because of medical reasons?
Well,
Or
it's on the revenue
is
side.
it in there? All right.
It's not much compared to other towns, because I'm glad you asked that. That was going to be one of my questions.
It was. I meant to do it
Sorry,
as the second
it's
part
on
to
our-
mine, but
That's okay. It's on our where it says revenue. This sheet. It's probably at the very end of our book.
at the back.
I just put it at the front, so I don't
Yeah,
have to flip the heavy
there is the
thing.
Medicaid reimbursement. It used to be around
It's
300
only
to 400,000.
$20.
And now it's around 20 grand.
Yeah, I know
Because-
Londonderry though is 250 this year, but previous years they were not. So I think that it also has to do with like the population of the students, and if they receive Medicaid themselves, if they're of the population that might be receiving Medicaid, then they would have to fill out the form, right, I believe, for our district to send money for them.
So there was a change, yes, and as like we said, the Medicaid rules have been a moving target for school districts for the past 5 years since.
Just thinking it could be some relief if there's any relief
Yes.
out there to be had.
Correct. We do agree with that, and we have said that often. And I have said to Mr. Littman, who oversees that particular program, it's very hard to be a director of student services, a business administrator, and sit in front of a school board and a budget committee and say, these rules are moving targets. And you're asking us to operate now based on, you're asking us to submit billing from a year ago, because that's how far back we're allowed to go, based on rules that weren't in effect a year ago. So what we have discovered is, a great example was transportation. There was some difference in transportation logs and how they were supposed to be kept and held. And then we went to submit them, and they said, oh, no, we're sorry. You have to use the new rules. And we said, but we can't use the new rules because this was done when the old rules were in effect. And they said, well, that's not our concern. And we said, well, it's the school district's concern because, again, as I said to Mr. Littman, I have to sit here, the business administrator has to sit here and say this, and then we know they're going to become even more complex moving forward because all districts have seen this drop in Medicaid. One of the other things that they have done is some districts have been able to bill for Medicaid and special education aid. And they have gone, and there was a district I worked in, we did that for a very long time. And Medicaid said, no, thank you, that's double dipping. Pick which one you want. And we went, okay, but we don't know what we're gonna get here. We don't know what we're gonna get here, right? And that's why districts were doing it. So Medicaid numbers are very much in flux. And towards Ms. Bernier's point, it also does depend on the students. And now we have learned that there may be, again, maybe an impact to parents of students receiving Medicaid that we would not be aware of because it's not my business if parents use Medicaid for their insurance for their students, right? But before, there was never impact, but then we were informed by Mr. Lippman that there may be an impact.
Yes, there's a huge Medicaid redetermination that has been going on. So all of the criteria that was put in place because of COVID, those restrictions are being lifted. So there has been a mass exodus, not of their choosing, of people who have been redetermined that they do not qualify for Medicaid, and they're being pushed out to ACAs, the commercial exchanges, in order to get insurance. So I think that also has something to do with it as well. We've seen a huge, I work in the healthcare industry, analytics, and there's been a huge influx of decreases in Medicaid and moving over to commercial exchanges.
And towards your point, it was very shocking for us in the school district. We had always been taught and trained that Medicaid to schools is a reimbursement to the district and does not impact parents. And when we were shared that, and then we were also shared the fact that they can't promise us how it's going to impact a parent's private Medicaid, which is desperately important to them, it became the districts found themselves in a bind. And we have been assured, we were on a Medicaid call 2 months ago, where we asked them, tell us please about the new rules. And they said, we're going to get to you. We want you to help us draft them. And we said, okay, would you like our opinion? And particularly, we want you they wanted us to say the following things to do what they wanted them to do. And we do know that there will be additional overlays in cost to districts for when the new Medicaid rules come out. We haven't quite heard what they were, but what they did share to us was that the state has a grant to research and explore how they're going to change Medicaid. And once they do that, there's going to be a cost for us to have people bill for us. There's going to be a cost for the billing, and then there's going to be a potential cost for reimbursement as well.
Marie?
One more question. I was reviewing my questions here. Are the IEPs written in-house by your special ed teachers, or are they contracted out to a company?
IEPs are written in-house.
Okay.
And IEPs are written by special education teachers. Right. I will say, in case people hear it in the news, my younger brother, who is 39, is a teacher in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio. They are so short-staffed that he teaches in the buildings because he's a certified math teacher, God bless him, and special education. But they have people that sit downtown that do work through agencies that are certified special educators that write just IEPs. We are not in that kind of desperate situation in New Hampshire. Our IEPs are written by highly qualified special education teachers with the input of the appropriate specialists.
That are employees of the district?
They are employees of the school district,
Awesome.
absolutely.
Awesome. So they know the kids.
Yes, and also there's a quality control. It's very important to me that when I have a contracted service provider, that the services that are in there, we are sure that they are necessary for FAPE, not padding someone's own paycheck. That's why our LEAs also review them as well.
They'll go into the class and observe
Mhm.
as well. That's part of the process too.
Yeah, it really hasn't changed as much as I thought it might have.
Any other committee questions? Thank you very much for joining us and spending a lot of time on a very important topic. Thank you.
You for having me.
Okay. Seeing the time, I'm yet again going to move to the next item on the agenda. We need to approve the minutes from the last two meetings, the January 7th and January 14th meetings. Are there any, Pat sent them out via email for the committee to review. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Naomi?
They're very minor, and I emailed it back to Pat, and I believe she's already updated it, but just for transparency purposes, the January 7th minutes had Ken Martin as the school board representative, and it was actually me, so that's been fixed.
Thank you. I had a similar revision on the people present for the January 7th meeting. So I will just note that you already got the Ken one, so that was good. I believe Lee was here for that meeting,
7th, yes.
and you're listed as absent, so that's a correction. And then Gina, I believe you were not here for that meeting.
No,
on the
surgery
7th.
for the bullmost saving.
So remove Gina, remove or add Lee back in, and then we've got Ken. Anything else on the January 7th minutes? Okay. Then I had one on the January 14th minutes, which is.
Is there a motion on the January 7th minutes?
Would we like to do them separately? Okay. Let's take a motion. Why not?
Motion to approve the January 7th minutes
I'll make a second.
As drafted with the amendment.
as drafted with the amendments. Sorry, I'm new to this.
All right. So Mackenzie seconded. All in favor? All opposed? Abstain? The minutes passed. On to the January 14th minutes. Were there any additions or corrections to those minutes? I have one item. Oh, no. That was the other one. Okay. Any motion to accept the January 14th minutes?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'll do it twice.
Just for fun, how about Gina motions and Brian seconds? How's that? Gina is motioning to accept the January 14th, and Brian is seconding. All in favor? Vote. Eight? 4, 5, 6, 7, oh, 9.
9.
Okay. All opposed? Abstain? Chuck, did you vote?
I vote present.
All right, those meetings, minutes passed. Our next meeting date is February 4th at 7 p.m. here. Just curious if anybody had a motion.
Yeah.
Like last week.
That's a good question. I have a motion. Maybe we have the same one.
Go ahead, Marie.
Question and then motion?
Yeah, my question was, did we make the time change for all future
We did
meetings?
not. We just made it for this
For
one.
just this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Would anyone like to motion?
I move that we change the start time on February 4th to 6 p.m.
I'll second that.
Can we make a mod?
All in favor?
Can we?
Oh, would you like to
Yeah,
deliberate? Go ahead.
Does it make sense to do it one meeting at a time, or do we want to do it all future meetings?
No, because the public hearing timing has already been determined.
Okay.
And published.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Mhm.
We had to send the public information
No,
out last Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
But we scheduled it for 6:30 as a start time and a 7 o'clock here. Okay?
Good idea, though. I'm
Thought
on
I'd
board with it. All right. Any other deliberation before we vote? All right. All in favor of changing the February 4th time to 6 p.m.? All opposed? Abstain? Present?
I am indeed present.
Excellent. Thank you, Chuck. All right. I don't think I've forgotten anything else, except to open the floor for public participation, if there is any.
Lori Peters, 7 Newton Street. I wanted to address 2 questions that were asked of the board that I thought were excellent questions, and I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on them from an educator's perspective. Regarding the one-to-one devices, post-COVID, every educator in this room knows that the face of education changed dramatically. We no longer teach and deliver instruction, review sheets, quizzes, tests, assessments, the way we did prior to COVID. Because of that, nearly every district, charter, private school in the nation has gone to one-to-one devices, whether they allow the students to bring them home or leave them in the classroom or they bring their own device. Pretty much every school is one-to-one device throughout our country. The preliminary data on whether this is effective for education is coming in, and it is showing positive increases in technological education and word processing and the ability to write. We're also seeing that for some students who are receiving special education services, it has become a great tool that we didn't have previously to deliver their specialized instruction. We do know that taking notes is much better on paper than it is on computers, and it is why with my students, I always made them actually take notes or have fill in the blank if they didn't have an accommodation or modification, because we retain information better when we write it down. However, engagement in the classroom is better with technology. Teachers use tools such as Kahoot, Quizzes, Edpuzzle, and other engagement tools because we know that engagement and keeping the attention of our students is really important now because we've seen attention spans of students and adults decrease post-COVID. So technology is not just a tool in the classroom, it is a necessary tool as we move forward for all grades. As a mom of college students, my first college student graduated from Riviera in 2018. She used Canvas, she used some technology. My son, who is a senior at Liberty University this year, he uses technology 100% of the time. All of his textbooks, all of his homework as an economics major, in his math classes, in his physics classes, in his finance classes, all online. There's nothing in college that is paper anymore. They use Canvas, but a lot of schools use Blackboard, Brightspace, but the delivery of instructional materials in college is all online. They do receive PowerPoints in class, but for the most part, everything they do is on their computer. And so our students need to be prepared for that when they leave the Merrimack District. I wanted to affirm something that our Director of Student Services said. When I first ran for the Budget Committee in 2020, which was the longest town election cycle ever because it was delayed, one of the reasons I wanted to be on the Budget Committee was to look at student services, to see what was happening in our budget with student services, because I too had heard many members in the public and on social media say, people are moving to Merrimack because we give away special education services. At the time, my daughter was a special education major in college. And so through her, I learned a lot. And then I went back for my educational master's and learned even more. Data drives all decisions. Special education services are not given based on wants, desires, or hopes of an IEP team member or anyone in the community. It is driven by data. That data is through scientific assessments that are evaluated by experts. The data drives those decisions. We are a data-informed district on every level, especially in special education. Students who move to this district who already have IEPs or out-of-district placements, we are legally required to honor those existing services they were already receiving in their previous district. Yes, we do follow up and we have evaluative services, but when they first come in, we take exactly what they have and we honor that until we reach the appropriate time for reevaluation. What I think people are seeing, and in the 5 years I have been on the Budget Committee and the board, is that Merrimack delivers quality services, not quantity, quality. And as I have studied and talked to special educators across the nation, there are districts that don't provide quality. There are districts, and if you know of advocates or have seen any communication by advocates, there are districts across our nation where there's always a fight to get the services the data supports. Our district is providing quality services. We do not over-service, we do not over-provide, we do not over-give quantity of services. We use the data to support those, and I just think that is an affirmation of the incredible staff we have here in the district.
Any other committee comments? Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to say public comments. Please, take the floor.
Shane Albuquerque, 10 Westcott Drive. How are you? I was on the budget committee for a few years, so I've been watching kind of in the background, and I attended this meeting. I came in a little late, but I guess I'm just surprised at I'm surprised at a few things. But I grew up in Merrimack. I born, raised here. Have my family here, and I'm fortunate enough to not have kids with special needs. But I'm surprised that we just spent an hour and a half talking about special needs services. We spent, 15 minutes on, fields and things, and students not being able to use fields. And then we spent an hour and a half on how we can, seems like, reduce special needs services. I guess I'm just surprised. Somebody brought up, capping the amount of students that we allow in the district to be special needs. What do you think, we choose to have special needs kids? I don't, that confused me and scared me a little bit. And prior meetings, it seems like the mission here is to reduce personal tax burden, which is concerning, right? Some people, at least one person in this committee doesn't, they took their kids out of they're homeschooling their kids. So I'm just surprised at some of the decisions that we're discussing here. And I guess my question is, what's the goal? Is the goal to save your tax dollars? Or is the goal to give kids a good quality education? Every kid in the district, a good quality education. If that means spending some more on some kids that need more, let's do it. You know, the kids got to get to the same place the other kids got to get to. If they don't have a bus and we got to pay their parents to do that, let's do it. I mean, there's like equality in services here, and I guess I'm just really sad the amount of time that's spent. It seems like trying to save some money. And, you know, candidly, if you look at the amount of money spent, and, you know, as a taxpayer, you got to pay attention to that. You know, the amount of money that we pay as tax dollars out of our pocket for these millions of dollars worth of services is not a lot of money. You know, it's probably saving $10, $15 each. I see you, Brian. I see you. And, well, you know, you came from Massachusetts. You had said you came up and, you know, you... No, that's cool. No, and I didn't say that, but, you know, a lot of people come up from Massachusetts because it's a little bit more family-oriented in New Hampshire. It's a little bit more welcoming. It's a little bit more equal. Yeah, if that's what you're coming for, then that shows in the committee. Yeah. I wasn't looking to argue with you here, Brian.
Point of order. Point of order. I have a point of order.
I just let Brian know that we have committee response after public participation. Thank you for your point of order.
No, my point of order is that it is not proper for a member of the budget committee to engage people at the microphone in public participation. It's not appropriate.
Yes, I just let the committee member know. Thank you.
And I wasn't attacking, you know, personally there. You brought it up in the committee, so I wanted to pay attention. That statement scared me, and I didn't want that to be the public's listening to this. You know, I guess I'm hoping that this committee isn't just looking to cut special services. Like that kind of irks me a little bit. So I wanted to make that a point. The other point was, you know, we spent a lot of time on talking about fields, a little time on talking about fields. You know, we talk about this every year. So, you know, we send kids to other districts. We can't fix the fields because of water, drainage, and everything else. Instead of cutting special services, let's put some money into a turf field and then not talk about it ever again. We can just use it. I guess I would implore the committee to look into things that'll advance our ability in the school district, which would raise us up from whatever rating, you know, you read, and not cut what we have. That would be my plea. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments? Are there any committee comments? Brian?
We're not looking to cut anything right now. We're looking to come up with a number that kind of gives people a choice in town, because right now our default is almost our budget, which kind of doesn't leave any room for any choice for anybody to make. If people are willing to kind of stay on this $5 million a year skyrocket, then that's up to them, and they will vote accordingly, and that's the budget we'll get, and that's that. But there are a lot of people that kind of want to get off that ride, and they want to kind of come back down to a reasonable number, and we're just trying to get to somewhere where we can give them a choice. Special ed was a lot of questions. It took a long time. It's a lot more important than fields. At least I think so anyway. That's why I thought we spent the amount of time that we did spend on it, and by no means are we looking to cut special education in any way. We're just looking over the broad scale of things to see where we can streamline it and at least try to give the voters the kids are extremely important, but a lot of people that voted to put me here that are at risk of losing their houses or have seen their taxes go crazy are also important as well. And to give them a choice is something that I think we should do. Even if it's a minimal difference, at least it's a choice for them to make either way. And by no means was it a dig on the special ed, because my daughter was in an IEP. So they are great people. I just wondered, I made that as a comment because it can't be a forever thing. Like if the people just keep coming and coming and coming and coming, next thing you know, 50% of our school population is on IEPs, we wouldn't be able to afford it. I don't know about you, but how are we going to afford that? What do you, how are you going to pay for it though?
Okay. We're not gonna engage this
Okay.
way, but I want to caution you about saying we. I want you to make sure that you're expressing your own opinions and not representing the committee in what we are trying to do. You have your thoughts. Everybody here on the committee is an individual and has their thoughts. And I think that's one of the great things about why we have spent so much time is that everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions and to make sure that they understand what they're being asked to look at before making any judgments or recommendations. This committee has not made any recommendations to date. I have heard some things, in social media, even things that were said about me that I said something. This committee has not made any formal recommendation as a committee. Individuals on the committee are asking questions to understand what they're being asked to make a judgment on at some point. And I think that it's fair for us to spend the time on doing that. Caitlin?
I just wanted to address Brian when you said that that if it's 50%, we legally have to provide all the students an education. So it doesn't matter if we want it to be cheaper. We're just gonna have to spend over and then have to ask for more money from the taxpayers when we are exceeding our special ed budget. In Bedford for the past 4 years, they haven't planned their budget accordingly for special ed, and they have had to let the tax people know that they have to take it out of a special account that they've set aside to be able to do that. But we don't do that. We put all of our money for special ed just right there on the board. So you can't, we have to take everybody. If you don't want to, you go to a private school. But public school is for everybody. And I personally take a lot of offense to saying that we would cap out at certain amount of population. That's the way you said it. It came out was not okay.
I'm sorry if I offended anyone. I just mean unless
multiple people, I'm sure.
Bill Gates or some other billionaires are moving into town.
You know what you could do on Thursday? There is a public hearing that you could attend, and I'm going to testify at, that instead of us just getting $2,000 for special education students extra, which is less money that we get for the free and reduced. We get less money for special ed than we do for free and reduced, yet we don't talk about free and reduced. So we get less money for special ed. On Thursday, there's a bill that is going to be put to the House for it to be up to $23,000 that we receive for special education students per student instead of the $2,000 that the state would be obligated to pay for. So there's absolutely things we can do, but saying people shouldn't come here because they have a child with special ed is not at all. I'm not here for that because I was here before my kids needed special ed, and I'm still going to stay here with my kids needing special ed.
Oh, I don't know who was first. I was listening intently. Marie?
Well, I just wanted to clarify, but I guess the gentleman has left. I taught in district at the high school for 25 years. One of my children had an IEP in his years. He graduated from Merrimack High School, and he benefited greatly from it, and is having a very successful career. So I ran because I feel that I'm very interested in education. But I also heard a lot of people's concerns about taxes, and I felt like I could be of service in kind of looking things over and analyzing and seeing if all these efficiencies that people were talking about could be made, really could be made. And it's been eye-opening for me. I've spent, well over 100 hours learning and studying and listening, and it has been very eye-opening for me. And I would say for myself personally, I have not made any decisions or declarations or anything that that I feel can be cut. But I do think it's our job as a budget committee to thoroughly look at this document with an analytical eye and to ask questions. I think that's what our charge is, to do that. So I take that seriously. Thank you.
Anthony?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I would reiterate, I think it's very true. It seems that some people, I know so many people have so much passion, and it's so interesting. It's just like part of being human. Like, I sincerely believe that every single person is trying to do the right thing. We just have different ideas about what that looks like. I know, like, when you look at all of the investments being made in the school, and yes, it's driving up spending. Yes, it's driving up budgets, right? And people see momentum and they're excited about that. And you also have, you know, elderly folks coming in and saying, please, like, I'm losing my house. And it's just a really interesting, you know, world where these things happen together. And I think what was said was exactly true. Like, we're not here to cut anything, but I think, like, the most ethical thing that we can try to do as a school district and the multiple committees that are involved in it is to try to give, like, just the voters the right and the opportunity to be the decision makers. I think we can't make the decisions for them and offer them 2 lowball numbers, or make the decisions for them and give them 2 choices that are high. I think that ethically, morally, like, the right thing to do is to give the voters the option and let them speak. And quite honestly, or I guess, Matt, are you paying attention, sir? If I could ask you just one quick question. Something I haven't noticed is, you know, giving is an option, right, to the school. How much money did we receive in just gifts last year?
Those are usually held at a school board meeting. We have gifts of cash. Probably, I would say, more than likely, like less than $1,000.
Less than $1,000?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Oh, how much was that one? Do you remember?
No, it was like $700.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
we're not talking $10,000, $20,000, $30,000.
Piece.
Right.
So the one thing I would say, like, just thinking about that, like, there really are people struggling, really are losing their homes, like, too sick and unwell to even physically come and, like, plead their case. And there are needs. I sincerely believe that, like, the most ethical thing that and the most magnanimous thing that anybody in the community could do is potentially look to try to give relief to the people who are pleading for it, and give, right, like $700 in giving out of the whole town to support education, like, voluntarily. Like, I'd love to see, I openly invite everyone and anyone in the Merrimack community who wants more investment in the schools, please, like, it'd be pretty easy to 10x that number this year. I mean, $700 is a small amount. I'd love to see more charitable giving. And I think just the opportunity for the voters to have the authentic opportunity to choose themselves what they want to do.
Mackenzie?
And I think I just, for just a few minutes, would like to bring this back to Marie's point too. As you all know, I grew up with a speech impediment. I went through Merrimack schools my whole K through 12 career. And we talk about what are the accomplishments and what are the results of what we pay in taxes. And I can tell you right now, I wouldn't be who I am or where I am had it not been for the special education services that I received in this district. I had a speech pathologist. I had anxiety. I was in the PATH program. And, you know, here I am, 6 years on the budget committee, town council. I work at a college. I have a master's degree. So, you know, I think that is a result of the special education services that I received. And I was that girl in class that wouldn't speak up. I would be quiet. I didn't want to participate. And it was because of the teachers in those courses and the paras and just the wonderful resources and assistance that I received that I am where I am today. And I can truly say that that's because of the Merrimack School District. So, I think when we talk about success stories and accomplishments and what are our tax dollars at work doing, it's helping a student such as myself. And I think for me, that's why I ran. It's why I'm so passionate about this work. I see it day in and day out in my work at the college with low-income students or students who might also need accommodations. And I was able to go to college with no accommodations at all. So, I think, again, it's a true testament to what the work of our educators does and all of the resources that your tax dollars provide. So I guess I just wanted to add that input.
Gina?
Thank you. And I appreciate that everybody has their own opinion and everybody just wants to understand. And I think that it's up to us, and these questions help educate the public because they just don't understand. So with why I had such a long-winded summary of special education is because it is really important for people to understand, and I don't think they do, that it is a federal and state mandate that we provide FAPE in the least restricted environment. And we have that obligation to, it's not a moral obligation, which it should be. It's a legal obligation. And I think that people just don't understand that. So again, it's, being on the budget committee, if you're upset about your tax, we moved to Merrimack, we didn't have kids. We still pay taxes, and, it's the school systems that, often drive up the value of the properties. Because if you have a good school system, that, people want to move in. But I just, especially with student services, want to make it clear that it's for every student, and it is a legal obligation that we provide FAPE in the least restrictive environment.
Naomi?
I wanted to speak to choice for a minute. I have a document with me that I actually asked for at the during budget cycle last year. It's a history of the proposed budget and the default budget over the last 10 years. And if you look up until, out of the last 10 years, there are 2 years where the default budget and the proposed budget were different by more than $500,000. So there's a whole big history of the default budget and the proposed budget being really, really close. And one of the things we've talked about on the school board is how that's not a choice. It doesn't provide meaningful choice. And really what all of those budgets right next to default were doing were they were like keeping the ship afloat. That's all they were doing. There was not room for improving our curriculum. There was not room for adequately compensating our staff, and we saw staff turnover because of it. And I just lost my train of thought. I don't want to go back to those days. Another point that I brought up at the school board meeting last week was that the state recently released the average cost per pupil for the state and the numbers for each district, and Merrimack's we're hovering right around the average for the state. We're paying average money to educate our children in Merrimack for the whole state of New Hampshire. And I went and I looked up our test scores for the last 3 years, and 3 years is about how long we've been implementing the new curriculums that we have put in place. And in 2022, before we'd implemented much of anything, we were 1% difference. We were 1% over the state average in terms of reading scores. In 2023, we climbed to 2% over the state average in reading scores. And last year, we were 6% over the state average in reading scores. So we are paying average money for numbers that are going up. And all that is to say, I don't know if I have a summary, but I wanted to say that, yes, we absolutely need to provide choice. We also need to not go backwards. And another way that we provide choice is we've broken out some of those costs in warrant articles, right? We give the voters a choice about the roof replacement projects. They can decide, you know what, we can't do that this year. We provide, I mean, we're required to do this by law, but we provide voters transparency and choice around the staff contracts. We were able to say, you know, we're seriously underpaying our staff. We're going to need to do this to catch up. Will you support us? And we're really grateful that they have. So I don't want to discount the opportunities for choice that are there outside from the difference in the proposed budget and the default budget. And I also want to highlight the fact that the difference that we're requesting in the proposed budget and the default budget is way more of a choice than Merrimack voters have been offered in recent history. Thank you.
Rachel?
Thank you. I have two things. One, I'll start with first. I just want to, for the community members that are donating. So I know Matt and Naomi confirmed it's probably under $1,000, but if you look across a lot of the parent groups, a lot of the sport groups, a lot of the extracurriculars for robotics, drama, everybody is always running fundraisers. So the amount of money that comes in from community members is really, you know, a lot more than just the $700. So we're so thankful for all of those community members that can support all ranges of opportunity for our students in the school. So I just wanted to, you know, add that on because our community is, you know, kicking in for that part. And then I just also wanted to echo your comments, Jen. I really appreciate you saying that. This committee has not made any decisions yet. And the way that this committee will have a voice is through votes and through our deliberation process and through the work sessions. And so I do think I know it's hard to do sometimes, but I think just being more mindful of how we say we or you know, referencing the committee, because truly the voice of the committee is once we get into the work sessions and have the voice through our votes. So I appreciate everybody's time and commitment to, you know, info gathering. I know it's a big learning curve when you come on. It's like the fire hose method where you're just getting a lot of information, and, you know, the more years you stay on, it becomes a little bit less fire hose, and you still learn a lot along the way. So, you know, I think we're doing the right things by gathering all that info. So thank you.
Shannon?
This being my first year, I've definitely learned and am still learning a lot just about the school board budget. I think it's great that we're able to ask questions out in the open and go to these liaison meetings asking like pertinent questions, you know, trying to figure out like where is this money being spent. But I think it's so important for us to be able to come out on TV and have these conversations so that the public can hear them, and also get a diversified questions. I mean, there are people on this board that probably have never worked in a school district, and they may be asking questions that they honestly don't know, and we can't. I may say something that may seem really stupid, but I honestly just don't know the question. I've always been taught in the Merrimack school system, no question is a dumb question, because we gotta figure things out. So I appreciate the opportunity of being able to speak openly so that the public can hear where this money is going. And I look forward to the opportunity of having our work session next week. So I'm excited about that, and that we got an extra hour to do so. So thank you.
Lee?
Couple of quick comments. You know, we talk about how much money we're trying to save, or you know, how much our taxes have been impacted. Chuck Moore made some excellent points at the beginning of these meetings, saying, you know, we really need to step it up at the state rep level to really get the funding from the state, which is we're the worst in the nation as far as what the state gives back to the communities for our education processes. There are other methods, and some figures were given to me recently where the water department has carried a $14 million surplus. Now, I don't know the water department's rules and regulations or why they can hold $14 million in a surplus, but that's an astounding figure. The town has a surplus of $9 million and gave back approximately $800,000 to the taxpayers. Again, I'm not sure why they're holding on to all of that money. I haven't dug into this yet, but it's curious that we see the largest budget obviously being the school budget and want to try and make changes there where there are other places where we could make a bigger impact to our community with some of the taxes and funding that we could get back. If anything, my years on this budget committee has taught me that we, as Naomi said, have pretty level funded our budget as best we can. And that was a mandate from the school board for many years. Let's just try and level fund this. We don't want to increase the taxes to our community. And again, to Naomi's point, we don't want to just be average, right? This is a hard thing for us to absorb. It's a lot of money. We get it. Every community, everybody's struggling with the taxes now. Communities across the country, right? Everybody's taxes have gone up. Our houses have increased in value significantly. There's all kinds of other things that are happening to our taxes outside of our school budget. I'd just like to wrap it up and say, I think in many ways, again, the years on this board has taught me that we haven't funded this community adequately. There are many, many more projects on the list, from maintenance to education, that could be funded much better. So I'd like to just make that point. Thank you.
I'd just like to make another point. This is not as the chair. This is just my, individual speaking. But at the end of the day, this committee doesn't cut line items. That's not our purview. The school board and the administration work together to decide how to spend the money that's budgeted. So I really take offense when people in the community say, they're cutting this, they're cutting that, because at the end of the day, we don't choose what to cut. We just come up with a bottom line number for the voters to vote on. We may disagree on what that is, and all of this process, all of the questions that we answer and the analysis that's being done, it's all to get us to that end goal, but it's not to cut people, programs, staff, things that are impacting students. I don't think that anybody on this board has the intention of cutting things that are going to make Merrimack education better. I think we all have the same goal in mind. And all these meetings are just how the sausage is made, right? People hear one or two people make a suggestion, well, maybe we could look at this, or maybe we could evaluate this, or can we analyze why this has gone up? Those are all just part of the process of coming up with that number at the end. And so I really hope that, as individuals on this committee, we can work together to come up with whatever that is at the end, and that the public can support the fact that we're trying to balance, we're trying to do the right thing. Everybody on this committee is trying to do the right thing, and there aren't ulterior motives for cutting this, cutting that. And I don't even like to use the word cut, because this board isn't here to cut anything. So that's just my personal thoughts. Are there any other committee comments? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion.
A motion to adjourn this meeting.
Gina motioned and
Second.
Shannon seconded. And I declare it done. Thank you.